Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm State Senator Liz Krueger, co-chairing this roundtable with very important chair of environmental conservation and my friend Pete Harcum from Westchester County. We're also going to be joined by a number of our colleagues from the Senate. I see Rachel May here and Andrew Gurnardis, and I think we're expecting a few more. This is a roundtable around CLCPA and where we are at this point in history with very complicated issues surrounding us. And Pete, I think, will go a little bit into the politics and reality of our times, but I'm going to try to just go through quickly sort of the rules of the road. It's a 4-hour roundtable, which has 5 panels, and each panel is allocated approximately 45 minutes. Each panelist may speak for 3 minutes, followed by questions from senators. The chairs will have 5 minutes each for questioning, and other senators will have 3 minutes each. Senators should use the raised hand function in Zoom to queue up for questions, and Pete and I will see those. Carissa from Pete's staff will be the official timer for the panelists and the questions. And Justin from my team will keep track of the overall time for each panel and alert the senators when we are approaching the 45-minute mark. We are recording this event, and it will be shared with other senators as well as publicly posted on YouTube and the Senate website. First off, we want to thank you all for joining us in this virtual roundtable to examine legislative, budgetary, and executive actions necessary to achieve New York's climate targets. It's a big topic. We won't get to all of them in 4 hours, and I will let Pete go into that reality for us all. And we are hoping that this will be the beginning of a serious ongoing discussion between the executive and the legislature about where we need to go at this point in history vis-a-vis laws we have passed, timelines we may or may not be in sync with, or frankly, disagreements about what we're supposed to do. Basically, as I said, it's 4 hours divided into 5 panels. When your panel is called, you'll be promoted to a Zoom panelist, so we'll be able to see and hear you. When your panel is finished, you'll be demoted back to an attendee. Of course, we hope you'll stay and listen. Each panelist, again, will have 3 minutes to summarize their testimony. Of course, the full written testimony will be available through the Senate website, so that you're writing down a lot of good information does not go to waste. It just, we can't possibly have everybody read their full testimony. I mentioned already the amount of time legislators can ask questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Senator Pete Harcum.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Krueger. And thank you and your team for their amazing work. I want to thank my team, Senator Parker's team. We've been joined by another senator, Senator Brian Kavanaugh. As Senator Krueger mentioned, we'll be joined by other members throughout the morning. I want to thank all the panelists who are going to be joining us. Great opportunity for us to discuss where we are with the CLCPA, what's working, what's not working, what we can do better, what we have to do, what we can do differently. And as Liz said, this will inform a discussion with the executive branch. This is being recorded. We're going to be showing this to relevant state agencies on the second floor, and then we'll have a second roundtable for them to come to respond to the testimony that we hear today. I just want to make a sort of, as Senator Krueger mentioned, talk about our time constraints. Look, we have amazing, amazing advocates and NGOs in New York, and we value everybody's input. The reality is, when we do a public hearing, as we do for the budget, I think our last environment and energy budget hearing is 14 hours. We are so willing to sit and stay and value everyone's testimony. This is a roundtable. We just couldn't possibly fit everybody in. So no slight intended to anybody who is not included. This is more of a snapshot, a focus group, a conversation starter. Obviously, there'll be much more in the budget hearing. Many more groups will be able to attend and participate. But of course, our offices are always open. Senator Krueger and I are constantly meeting with the great groups we have in New York. We will continue to. That's our commitment. That's our partnership. That's our collaboration. So with that, I think I will turn it back to Senator Krueger to introduce the first panel, and away we go.
Thank you so much, Pete. I'm just double checking. Yes, no more senators quite yet. So our first panel was going to be 4 people, but unfortunately Connor Bambeck from New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, I think, is sick and had to cancel. But we have Hyang, I apologize pronouncing it wrong, from Push Buffalo, followed by Samantha Wilt from NRDC, followed by Alicia Steinler from the New York League of Conservation Voters. And you feel free to correct the pronunciation I just screwed up for everyone. And let's start with Push Buffalo.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Thank you very much, senators, for giving me the opportunity. My name is Online, and I serve as policy coordinator at Push Buffalo, a 20-year-old grassroots organization advancing housing and climate justice for frontline and underserved BIPOC communities, not only in Buffalo, but across Western New York. We all know that buildings account for 1/3 of New York State greenhouse gas emissions. In Western New York, 68% of disadvantaged communities live in Buffalo. Our research and daily engagement show that repairing home is unaffordable. This region has some of the oldest housing stock in the country: leaky roofs, lead paint, broken windows, and no insulation. Most residents are tenants, and both DACs and middle-income households are burdened by rising rents and utility bills. One big, beautiful bill won't fix this. It could deepen poverty and hardship in our region if not done equitably. With a 60% cut to Empower Plus funding, we are deeply concerned about the lack of access to clean energy for Western New Yorkers. This undermines our ability to meet the goals of the CSCPA. Progress on CSCPA implementation is stalled by underfunding of renewable energy projects, the absence of regulated frameworks to hold polluters accountable, and rate hikes imposed by those same polluters. The dismantling of the Inflation Reduction Act will only make this worse. Therefore, we urge the Senate to pass the Kevin Invest program as 4651A3975 to mitigate the funding gap left by the dismantling IRA, maintain Empower Plus, support DACs, and invest in renewable energy. Pass the New York Heat Act as 4158A4870 to cap utility bills at 6% of household income and stop subsidizing polluters. Increase funding for the GET Fund as 3315A2101S. We are grateful for the Senate proposed $200 million, but the final budget only allocated $2 million. This fund is essential for pre-weatherization improvements so that all New Yorkers can access clean energy. Invest $400 million.
Time is up. If you could just sort of summarize your last couple of paragraphs.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Invest $400 million in Empower for the next 2 years. New York State must invest $400 million over the next 2 years to expand assets, meet rising demand, and safeguard the program for further funding cuts that could undermine climate justice and affordability goals. Thank you very much for your time and for your leadership in advancing climate and housing justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we've been joined by a few other senators, Natalia Fernandez, hi. I think we mentioned Brian Kavanaugh, and Rachel May and Andrew Nardis, just letting senators know. Each person in a panel will speak, and then we can ask questions and raise your hand if you have a question after the three panelists. So now we have Samantha Wilt from the Natural Resources Defense Council. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you again for joining our event yesterday. You were fantastic. It was a real pleasure. Hi, I'm Samantha Wilt. I'm the Climate and Energy Policy Director for New York at NRDC, where we were founded and we are headquartered. And we've been working for 50 years for public health and the environment. Sorry, at this end of Climate Week, and as was so starkly highlighted, we've seen every day for the past 9 months, who can believe it, we're facing an unrelenting assault on the very foundations of environmental protection at the federal level. And as you all have worked so hard for your entire careers, we've had extraordinary improvements in the air and water quality in New York, which have benefited everyone, all our residents and all our communities, and now are really, at grave risk. I'm sure I've shown you all, but there's a great photo in the Library of Congress from 1973 of the George Washington Bridge in pretty much pea soup smog. And that was a bad smog day. That wasn't sort of extraordinary Canadian wildfires. That's what I grew up breathing. So, we can't go back. In light of that extraordinary risk, we have to redouble our efforts to ensure that our air and water is safe, our economy is strong, efficient, and focused on the future. In light of this unprecedented risk and uncertainty, making long-term decisions about extraordinarily expensive infrastructure, our elected officials and the agencies really have to ensure that those investments are scrutinized extraordinarily carefully, and we have to focus on no regrets investments that are aligned with our critical goals. We really can't be spending billions of dollars of families' money on sort of the wrong old infrastructure. This is not the time. With risk and uncertainty, people get nervous, right? There's a fight or flight response. And I think we're making some of the wrong decisions, unfortunately. We have to continue to move ahead with economically efficient investments that make our homes, vehicles, schools, communities, and businesses stronger and better, as Push Buffalo knows so well and delivers so well, because that is actually the smart, equitable way to run our state and deliver a better future for our kids. Our list of legislative, budgetary, and executive agency actions are as follows, and I'll just do a quick recap. Legislative, obviously, again, thank you, Senator Krueger and Senator May and everyone. The 100-foot rule repeal bill needs to be signed by the governor, and there was a great press conference yesterday. Thank you for keeping the heat on, as it were. New York heat has to get done, all the rest of it. Again, thank you for that great win, but the other parts are also incredibly important, and they're incredibly cost savings. If everyone's focused on affordability, a good way to do that is to not plow lots of money in. Sorry, I know I'm over time. Climate Polluter Handout Act. We need low-cost municipal bond financing to enable great investments in our oldest in the nation building stock. And then the Healthy Homes Right to Know Act to protect our children. It's just informational. It doesn't cost anything. And then obviously cap and invest. And if we can't have cap and invest next year, we need more Sustainable Future Fund money, but really focused on Empower Plus. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And next up is Alicia Dean Steinler from the New York League of Conservation Voters. Morning.
You got it. Pronunciation was perfect. Happy Climate Week. Thank you, Chair Krueger, Chair Harcum, Chair Parker, for hosting this timely roundtable on the CLCPA, and Senators May, Gunaras, Kavanaugh, Fernandez, and other legislators for attending and engaging. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Alicia Dean Steinler, and I am the new legislative advocate for the New York League of Conservation Voters. We are a statewide environmental advocacy organization dedicated to fighting climate change, conserving land and water, and protecting public health through political action. Can you believe it's already been 10 years since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed? 10 years ago, most countries in the world recognized that greenhouse gas emissions were creating irreversible harm to future generations, and they committed to lowering emissions. 10 years after Paris, we now find ourselves in a more polarized America with a federal administration trying to go backwards to dirtier times, ignoring science, ignoring clean energy technology, and even claiming that greenhouse gas emissions are not that dangerous. The good news is, New York State is still poised to lead the nation on climate policy by working towards the goals of the CLCPA, using proven policy mechanisms, passing supporting laws, and ensuring we invest adequately in renewable energy and battery storage. The single most important thing New York State can do to get the CLCPA back on track is to launch the Cap and Invest program. Cap and Invest is the strongest, most cost-effective tool at the state's disposal to both tackle the climate crisis using a market-based approach to incentivize economy-wide emissions reduction while generating billions of dollars in recurring revenue from polluters for investments in deeper carbon reductions and in climate justice. Draft Cap and Invest regulations, which by law were supposed to be published no later than 2023, have been delayed. We urge Governor Hochul to direct DEC and NYSERDA to advance the rules for public comment. We were pleased to see the governor and legislature commit $1 billion for the Sustainable Future program in the New York State budget and for climate mitigation and adaptation. We also hope to see an additional $1 billion in next year's budget. However, we want to ensure that the Sustainable Future program is additive to Cap and Invest, not a substitute. We appreciate your leadership in sponsoring several key pieces of legislation that will complement the goals of the CLCPA. We have identified them in our written testimony, and I will quickly list them now. New York Heat, Senator Krueger; the Customer Savings and Reliability Act, Senator Krueger; Clean Fuel Standards, Senator Parker; ASAP, Accelerate Solar for Affordable Power, Senator Harckham; and the Stop Climate Polluter Handouts Act, Senator Krueger. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. Pete, would you like to start us off with questions?
Sure. Thank you, Liz. And thank you all for your testimony. I have a couple different lines of thought. Following up on what Alicia was saying, let's talk a little bit more about Cap and Invest. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And by not implementing Cap and Invest, how far behind are we falling? And what are the impacts of us not implementing Cap and Invest? And I open it up to all three. Anyone?
Sorry,
ahead.
Senator. I'm happy to take a first shot. Sorry, my trackpad is not clicking right. I apologize. So, as you know, California just re-upped their Cap and Invest program for 20 years. The funding certainty, so there's the overall level of funding, obviously, that's hugely important. The funding certainty is hugely important, as you know better than most. The federal, we don't have a lot of ways to regulate transportation and buildings in the state. Many things are preempted and are out of our control and purview. This is the way to address the emissions from the transportation and building sector. And then also similarly, the way to invest in our buildings, as Ang was saying, we have the oldest stock in the country and we need to put money into them. And putting money into our housing stock improves our housing, which is another huge crisis, as you know, plus improves the climate. So, and it improves health and safety, and it reduces air pollution. So anyway, win, 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 win. And then we're going to use a bunch of revenue to help folks who are having trouble. You know, we have an endless energy affordability problem in this state. So it solves a lot of problems all at once, and is, again, the cheapest, best way to address those problems. And they're problems that we can't address in any other way. So anyway, it has a lot of important things. And as we sort of sit, there's no way to address those transportation. And now with the rollbacks, you know, we face a highly uncertain clean air future. So that solves a lot of things.
Great, thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit. Part of the CLCPA calls on all state agencies to put climate at the forefront of everything they do. And there's been some criticism that certain state agencies aren't doing this. And certainly there more criticism about the lack of focus on community-centered impacts of the decisions that state agencies make. What are you finding in the field in this regard? Are state agencies living up to their responsibilities of the CLCPA, and are they being public in the strategies that they're supposed to be implementing?
I would defer to my colleagues. That's a really tough question. I know some are doing better than others. I think Josiel, please go ahead on. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Senator, for that excellent question. So, Push Buffalo also work with the NYSERDA and, for clean energy hub for Western New York, region. So, in Buffalo area, 68% are disadvantaged community. And when we conduct the regional assessment and barrier analysis report, we have found that most of the people are immigrants or refugee population. I'm one of them. I came from Burma or Myanmar 3 years ago. So I really appreciate that. But the problem is we have the language issue, and also sometimes we call it is a Medicaid population. They really rely on Medicaid and Medicare. So if we have the federal gap funding, there will be an impact not only for state institution but also for the constituents. The real problem is when we reach out, for the houses of worship. Some people, I don't want to be racist. Sorry about my using the term, like they call it like a location discrimination. So for the disadvantaged community live in the zip code, just like in the east side of Buffalo, next to Main Street, and then the energy audit people, oh, you are not qualifying because you live east side, even though they are in the So we give the recommendation to NYSERDA to have a cultural orientation, cultural competency for the energy auditors sent by NYSERDA. So we should be broadened because New York State is really welcoming refugees and immigrants. So we need to bridge the gap for the energy auditors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that's my time.
All right. Let's see. Do I have any colleagues with their hands up yet? I don't think so. So I'm going to take my time now. But I'll give all my colleagues more of a chance to raise their hand when they want to ask questions. So yesterday, the governor announced sort of the funding distribution that she's proposing for the $1 billion for the, I forget what they call the program, something for the future.
Sustainable Futures.
Thank you so much. That's good. Sustainable Future. And she sort of listed out how she was going to use this money. And I'm curious whether any of our panelists think that there was a better way to spend this money to ensure we are hitting our CLCPA targets and prioritizing those things that are most important to us. Because more as a statement than a question right now, I also see cap and invest and our failure to move forward on that an enormous problem for ensuring we have the infrastructure money to move forward with sustainability. But I certainly do want to give the governor credit for, I think, announcing she's releasing the money we put in the budget last spring. And I'm curious whether you all have had a chance to review what she's going to do with that money and whether you think those are the right kinds of investments. So any of the three of you.
I'll just say quickly, sorry, and I don't know if we should raise our hands, and it's hard with two screens.
Go right ahead, Samantha.
Anyway, the Empower Plus, Ong said, it's incredibly important. Those are the best investments we can make. That is long-term affordability. We are reducing bills. It's full stop forever. So Empower Plus got 50 million. That's great, but that's not going to make up the shortfall from the 200 million you all approved in the last budget, et cetera. So we need more money for Empower Plus for sure. Those are the most equitable, on the ground, real, tangible benefits. There's money for schools. That's also incredibly important. The legislature passed great legislation protecting children from extreme heat and teachers, but we need to put some air conditioning in some schools to do that. And of course, upgrading ventilation systems since the pandemic, et cetera. So that's all really important. So I'll stop.
I can take a stab at that. We are pleased that the governor is giving more detail to the fund, and we don't think there's anything wrong with that. The items that are being funded are all fantastic. Just to remind everyone, the policy mechanism like cap and invest and like congestion pricing, they generate money and they're more sustainable. This is kind of a one-time hit, in moving that money. And if we're looking at a tight budget year coming up, and the budget trends look like it's going to be tight for a couple years, these kinds of mechanisms are really what we need to be sustainable and not have to worry about brawling during the budget season to get money when there are these tools that work. And so cap and invest, cap and invest. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ang, did you have anything you wanted to say here?
Yes, Senator Kruger. So I would like to echo my friends here. I mean, cap and invest is really important, and also let me address Senator earlier question about how do we need to be done, for the cap and invest. So the state agency forecast like 5 to 10 million to meet the goals. So $100 billion from the governor is really generous, really appreciated, but it's not sufficient. So we don't want to put another burden on state legislature to think about how can we fund this. So we will highly recommend to have cap and invest, and then we would like to recommend to have the guardrails, because based on the California experience, most of the utility people or companies are paying for higher penalties because they just trying to pollute the areas live in disadvantaged community. So CSCBA is really focusing on equity for the disadvantaged community, so we need to think about that. And then we want to make sure that there is no loopholes for the utility companies to trade their allowance among themselves rather than paying for the penalties. So that will be the sort of like another alternative, to mitigate the funding shortage, dismantling, IRA and federal budget gap. So we can be on our own on CSCBA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think my 5 minutes is up if I'm reading the clock right. So let me pass it over to our colleague, Brian Kavanaugh. If you want to put your picture on, Brian.
Yeah, I sorry to be off camera for a minute there. But yeah, thank you to my Senate colleagues for convening this. Thank you for the panelists. As chair of the Housing Committee, I've been particularly focused on the energy efficiency and livability and affordability of the building, the sort of built environment. Housing, we have jurisdiction over housing, residential as well as commercial buildings. And of course, we have the Electric Building Act, which is going into effect for smaller buildings at the end of the year and larger buildings later. But ongoing questions about what to do with existing building stock. And this has been alluded to a couple of times, but can any of the panelists just talk a little bit more about the effectiveness of the programs we have? HCR has programs, NYSERDA has programs, some of the utilities have programs. And in addition to the question of, putting more money in, like, what can we do to make these programs more available, more effective?
I'll just jump in quickly. Thanks, Senator. And I'm sorry I missed saying hi to you yesterday, but thanks for coming to our event too. That's the $24 kajillion question. The new NENI, but now efficiency and building electrification programs were approved. They just filed a bunch of them. We've all been really focused on this for years. By my back of the envelope, Massachusetts spends 4 times more per capita on efficiency and building electrification. Connecticut just released their budgets. They spend about 30% more per capita. We have a lot of downstate, commercial office space. So maybe those numbers are a little funny, but we need to do better outreach. As Ong said, we need to make sure that we're reaching communities in a way that is effective. That's hugely important. We need to just keep working on data. There was a great event at NYSERDA last night, just really pulling real data from electrified buildings in New York City. That New York City has done an amazing job. Local Law 97 is truly extraordinary, and we have to support it and make sure it's a success that affects, millions of households in the city. So all of those things are hugely important. Lots of things are in flux and changing. Obviously, the federal disaster makes everything harder. But again, as you know so well, investing in buildings to make them better, last longer, be safer and more efficient is like a win on every front. So I'm happy to talk to you more. We all work on this a long, long time. There's a million things to say, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Brian, did you have any more questions?
I think Ong wanted to comment.
Yeah, I want to see if other panels had responses. Yeah.
Oh. So I think Rachel May had her hand up. Or wait, I'm sorry.
Liz, Ong wanted to comment on that.
Sorry, please, Ong. Yes.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. It's a great pleasure to meet you. So Bush is working on the housing justice and affordable housing for 20 years. So I would like to highlight that, the problem is the older housing stock in New York State. And the problem is, even though we applying for Empower Plus from NYSERDA, I'm not really criticizing. The problem is, the people look at how can we insulate the home. So, home improvement is really, really expensive. So we have like typical home in Western New York, Buffalo is leaky roof, broken windows. So even though we have the installation is the preconditions to do the home repair. So that's why we really appreciate the Senate leadership in advocating for 200 million allocation for GAP fund. So we need to increase that GAP fund next budget year so that each and every one of DAC members and households, they can have the access to sort of like all-rounded home repairs needed for the weatherization and electrification. Thank you very much.
Just one quick follow-up. Does anybody think we should be asking the utilities to do more in terms of making funding available, retrofitting, insulating?
I think so, but the problem is they trying to hide something because we are also working on the rate case. So even though they have the sort of like disadvantage DAC report, they said that, there is a lower demand for this program in some of the DAC areas, things like that. And also, it's also really interesting to see that NYSERDA DAC criteria is based on 2011 census. So there are gonna be a lot of changes, demographic and population, socioeconomic data. So we also update the DAC criteria as well.
Great. Okay, I'll leave it there. I know we're short on time, but thanks again to all the witnesses and for your answers.
Alicia, last word.
Yeah, just to acknowledge Senator Kavanaugh's question. I'm in my first week with the New York League of Conservation Voters, and I know that my organization has answers for you. So I will get back to you on those questions about buildings. Thanks.
Great, and welcome to LCV.
Thanks.
How about we go on to Rachel May?
All right, thank you. And thanks to everyone who's testified so far. This is kind of a follow-up on what Senator Kavanaugh asked about. I had a meeting this week with the people who do weatherization in my region of the state, and they say that OTDA, the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, is eliminating the funding for weatherization in this upcoming budget. And honestly, I feel like this is the low-hanging fruit in terms of reducing the need to use energy in homes, but it's also our major way of of targeting the communities that need the assistance the most. So I'm wondering if others have heard about that, if there is a concerted effort to push back against this, if we are, what people are thinking about this move from OTDA, which has to do with uncertainty from the federal government, but still, I think it's short-sighted.
I'll just jump in for a second, Rachel. OTDA has explained that it's because they know they are losing most, if not all, of their HEAP funding. And that is what's been the revenue stream for weatherization. And that the decision was made that it was better to ensure they had some money left for actually applicants who need the HEAP funding for the utilities versus cutting that out and keeping weatherization. I certainly agree with you. We can't afford to lose either, but I just want to point out this is yet one of those endless storylines of the feds are squeezing the blood out of our state budget.
Right. I guess my question is, if we want to make the argument to put that we would put this in the budget, how do people have the data on how it pays for itself? Because I think that's true both in terms of the savings and the jobs that it provides, but I would like our panelists to weigh in on that.
Right.
I'll just say we'll get you some data. This is a little bit to Senator Kavanaugh's question. The benefit cost analyses for all of the utility efficiency and heat pump programs are positive. There's different criteria for LMI, but there's lots and lots of data. I know, and you know her well, Betta Broad, who's at AEA and Workers for Clean Power, and others have been working very hard to try to get better congressional interventions to help WAP and HEAP. I mean, it's really disgusting as a society that's, you know, anyway, you all know, we're happy to get you data. You're absolutely right. It improves housing values, it lowers costs, and it helps health and safety. And to Ang's point, and as we've discussed, it's hard to find money for things. Putting aside the federal disaster, Cap and Invest would give us money for things like the GAP fund that could do the pre-weatherization and electrification investments that we desperately need and the neediest need them the most. So again, back to Cap and Invest in this strange and bad time, that is also really important, but we will be happy to get you some numbers. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions from senators? Pete, you're on mute.
Let me ask a question for our Cracker Jack team. Is the next panel here, or should we keep asking questions of this panel to give the next panel time to arrive?
The next panel is here. We have about 13 minutes still allocated to this panel. If you still have questions, I think we have time for it.
All right, I do have one question, if I may. We haven't touched upon transportation. That seems to be the one sector where we've made the least progress in New York. We are way behind on our compact goals. We've done virtually nothing on the heavy trucking fleet. Not only is transportation one of the major contributors to emissions, but certainly particulate matter, which is causing health issues in many of our communities, increased levels of asthma. 1,200 New Yorkers a year die prematurely because of poor air quality, largely due to transportation, particulate matter again. What do you think we need to be doing, and how do we jumpstart getting at the problems in our transportation sector?
I think the real problem is dismantling IRA because, you know, the incentives or tax credit for buying a new EV will be, you know, cut by Trump administration. So, but Buffalo, some of the area next to Peace Bridge, they have the highest asthma rate, and also East Humber Highway, which is the part of IRA project, and then they boycotted because there's increased asthma rate of that kind of highways. So that would be really great to consider how can we continue subsidizing EVs and also installation of EV charging station in New York State. That would be awesome. But the problem is how can we get the money to sustain that EV programs? And also I would recommend to think about the electrifying public transportation, and so that the people can see it, enjoy it, and then they can feel like they're clean. So that would be great. So let me repeat. I mean, I'm just like pushing all the time, like Kevin invests, to get the money from the polluters without touching the tax, so that we can sustain the clean transportation.
Anybody have any thoughts about the heavy trucking sector and the medium trucking sector where we've really done very little to nothing in New York?
So walking, sort of pausing, I don't know the right verb, but the advanced clean truck rule and sort of our incredible, fantastic work with California is unfortunate. And there was a lot of, intentional misinformation about the advanced clean truck rule, that it was forcing sales and It's actually a great, flexible, dealer friendly set of guidelines. So that's a real blow in the face of everything else. So we should fix that. I think there's a work group agency, something, and I apologize for being vague, and I'll get back to you obviously, but next week just to talk about, what we ought to be doing, if not that. And so I hope that there'll be real work to do that. But as you said, Senator Harckham, that's a way to help our communities. Disadvantaged communities have been horrifically burdened by infrastructure that they have no control over. And so we need to fix the polluting, non-point source, mobile source. So anyway, sorry. Thanks.
So
Thank you. That was helpful. Go ahead, Alicia.
sorry.
Yeah. Oh, just on not exactly the trucking that you're asking about, but we do have some movement and things in place already on retrofitting the diesel school buses. So looking at that and making sure that that we're focused and spending the money in the right way, making sure the agencies are carrying those actions out from the Bond Act and various places contributes to this.
And I actually have two additional questions. So I only had one, but then Alicia said the Bond Act. So remember the Bond Act? We passed it years ago, $4.2 billion. And does anyone have an opinion at this point in history whether that money is in fact being used effectively in the context of our targets for CLCPA, or has some of that money drifted into things that we don't really think it was originally intended for? One of the dangers of when you pass a bond act and you make a big deal of it and you get people to vote for it, and then it's years and years before you start to spend it, sometimes it doesn't always go to where you thought it would. So has anyone taken a look at that money recently? Samantha's saying no, I think. She's mute, but she's saying no. And Alicia's only been working there for a week or two. I hope that at least everybody will take a look at that question, because I think it's pretty important. Again, we've brought up cap and spend and invest several times, and the money we aren't getting from that could be used in all these good ways. Something else that CLCPA focused heavily on was the correlation between the dangers of pollution and climate change and the impacts on health for New Yorkers. And that in fact, the costs for healthcare literally were estimated to go up billions of dollars before 2050 because we aren't doing all the things we should be doing in energy. And I know we talked to the agencies that specifically deal with energy and climate all the time, you know, DEC, NYSERDA, Power Authority, PSC. But I'm just curious, do any of you know if the Department of Health is playing any role they should be playing in evaluating decisions made by the state and the negative impacts from some of those decisions? The one that comes to mind for me right away was when many of us were fighting for a moratorium on fracking gas in New York State. It was actually the then Commissioner of Health who suddenly popped up and said, actually, this stuff is really bad for people and health, and we should do a moratorium. And I think it surprised the hell out of Governor Cuomo, as I recall. But then he felt he had to actually go forward with a moratorium. So now we're being asked to accept 2 fracked gas lines that the state rejected 3 times already. And I'm curious whether any of you know, is the state actually doing evaluation on the health risks of doing fracked gas lines or other proposals that might be in the works?
I don't know, Senator, but I do know that NYSERDA's modeling on Cap and Invest has all of those extraordinary data points on the societal savings we're going to see from reducing, especially NOx pollution from combustion in buildings. So, and to Senator Harkham's point, also, of course, on transportation. But I can tell you that with more gas, we will have more combustion, because even though we don't need that gas, like, somebody's going to burn it. So, you know, again, that's not the answer you needed. So, and I don't know about the Department of Health, but I will tell you, obviously, that burning more stuff means bad things in the air that is worst for our eldest and our youngest, and really affects our, you know, success as a state going forward. You know, sicker people and kids that don't go to school don't learn, and they don't make a good, strong state into the future. So it's really, you know, mortgaging our future in a very dumb way.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Any other questions for our first 3 guests? If I see no hands, I'm assuming no. So then I think Pete and I want to thank the 3 of you very much for being with us this morning. And we're going to excuse you and invite our next panel to turn on their cameras. Or I guess Justin has to move them into being the panelists. And it is Gavin Donahue, Independent Power Producers of New York, Nick Garaglia, New York Offshore Wind Alliance, Claudia Viller-Lehman, New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium, and Deb Kelleher, the Alliance for Clean Energy New York. And we'll let them all get in. And when I see them, we'll ask them to turn their cameras on.
We have more than one Gavin Donahue in our attendee list. Gavin, will you, if the real you, raise your hand so we know which one to promote, please?
Will the real Gavin Donahue please stand up? Okay, I see Nick, I see Claudia. I thought I saw, oops, Deb, at least her picture, or her, oh, there she is. Hi, Deb. And then what do? We got rid of both Gavin just because we pointed out there were 2 of them? Oh, no, here's Gavin Donahue.
Should have
Okay.
everyone now.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here with us. And I'm just going to let you testify in the order that you are on the agenda. And again, you of course have submitted or will submit extensive testimony, and we appreciate that very much. And it will be up online at the Senate website for everyone to review, but you only have 3 minutes to summarize to start, and then we're all going to ask you questions. So we'll start with the real Gavin Donahue. Good morning.
Sorry, Senator. You would think after all these years I'd get it straight. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Gavin Donahue. I'm president of the Independent Power Producers of New York. I'm also a member of the Climate Action Council. For those of you who don't maybe know, my organization represents the largest fleet of clean energy generating companies in the state. We generate over 50% of New York's clean energy electricity. We produce 80% of New York's electricity using fuel from all sources. Over the last 25 years, we've invested over $10 billion in improvements to make the facilities cleaner and more efficient. We employ about 19,000 people across the state, and we pay over $1.5 billion in property taxes. I want to say this up front. My organization has always supported New York's clean energy future, but we've also stated that it needs to be done in a responsible and affordable manner. As a member of the Climate Council, I voted against the adopted scoping plan due to serious issues that were outlined at the time, dealing with reliability and affordability in the process. And unfortunately, those concerns are still very relevant today, since we already know New York is not achieving the 2030 target. Other variables to this process are supply chain issues, as we all know, inflation, COVID. The federal policy changes have had real implications in New York, creating more uncertainty to this process. My written testimony goes into detail with certain specific recommendations to address the concerns I just laid out. On affordability, electric bills are continuing to rise. 2/3 of a bill is made up of utility, transmission delivery costs, state fees, and taxes. A potential issue that could be addressed here is the use of RGGI monies to help pay for these high costs. Today, New York State is the only state in the RGGI compact that does not give money to customers through rebates. Other states do that as a way to deal with the affordability issue, and California just adopted legislation in that area. And back when we started this process, in my testimony, I outlined that 60 organizations, including IPNY, wrote a letter asking to find out what the ratepayer impact of all these changes will be under the CLCPA. In my written testimony, I outlined 11 different bills that are introduced in your House to make progress towards meeting the CLCPA goals. I'm just going to mention 2 of them here today. One, before I get into it, is we all know that the grid is growing. Our reliability margins are getting tighter. The ISO estimates that to meet our electrification goals, the grid needs to get 3 to 4 times larger than it is today in 20 years. Senator Parker has a bill, it was introduced in 2021, which would secure 1 gigawatt of zero emission resources. We also have a petition at the PSC with labor organizations to come up with a competitive program to foster that development. We are going to increase energy consumption, as I indicated, 3 to 4 times. The grid needs to be built, but 50 to 90% over the next 20 years. The zero emission resources that are needed to reach this target, the Senate has a bill, and they should urge the PSC to act on that issue.
Hey, Gavin, we're at time. If you could just summarize.
Okay, the last issue, Senator, is something very important, is carbon pricing. We believe Senator Parker also has a bill with Assemblywoman Paulin, 732 in the Senate, which would put a price on carbon. And I think you heard that from the earlier panel, that putting a price on carbon would provide necessary revenue to build those types of resources that we're looking for. And then the last thing is we need more competitive RFPs through NYSERDA. They need to be issued in a more timely way. They need to be more predictable. So I have more to add, but that sort of summarizes where we are in my testimony. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Pete, do you want to start us off?
Oh, we've got more panelists.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Not enough coffee yet today, not to worry. I'll be.
I know the feeling, no worries.
I so apologize. Okay, Nick Garaglia from New York Offshore Wind Alliance.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Thank you to the entire New York State Senate for having me. This is a great opportunity. My name is Nick Warilia. I'm the advocacy manager for the New York Offshore Wind Alliance. We are at a pivotal moment. Federal headwinds have affected the renewable energy industry, more specifically offshore wind. Permits have been slowed and lawsuits are working their way through the judicial system. This does not mean we have to pause New York State's progress on achieving the New York State CLCPA. We have the tools and resources to move forward now, especially when it comes to upgrading New York's transmission system, investing in supply chain and infrastructure, and reforming the procurement process. Acting today will stabilize the offshore wind industry, create jobs, and shield ratepayers from unnecessary costs. First, New York State must modernize its transmission grid. Our system is outdated, especially in the downstate region, and connecting new projects is one of the biggest costs developers face. New York City's electrical grid and transmission corridors are congested. The cost of upgrading and preparing the grid will not be cheaper in the future. If we plan and invest now, costs will be cheaper, and the generation side of our energy industry will benefit from lower transmission costs. But by coordinating planning through state agencies, New York ISO, utilities, and municipalities, we can reduce risks, cut costs, and make sure projects can, quote, plug in faster. Transmission upgrades are not just technical investments, they are long-term savings. The New York ISO estimates these upgrades could save New Yorkers up to $70 billion in production costs alone. This means that we should be planning the New York City PPTN, continuing with the New York Propel project, and looking at other transmission upgrades that will facilitate easier opportunities for offshore wind to, quote unquote, plug in. Second, procurement reform is important. Current rules are rigid, risky, and expensive. We recommend more flexible contracts, decoupling projects from supply chain, and streamlining timetables. Third, we are asking the state to spend the $500 million already allocated through NYSERDA's budget. Those funds are dedicated in NYSERDA's budget for the advancement of offshore wind industry activities. The funding should be spent around pre-development activities, port development or port redevelopment, and supply chain building. Using that money now will reduce the cost, de-risk projects, and send strong messages to New York is open for business, even during federal headwinds. In conclusion, New York cannot control federal permitting delays, but we can control how we plan, invest, and lead here at home. By upgrading our transmission system, streamlining permitting, reforming procurement, and deploying funds that are already on the table, we will protect ratepayers, stabilize our clean energy sector, and ensure New York remains a national leader in offshore wind. Thank you for your unwavering commitment to the industry, and the New York State Senate has shown that they are leaders when it comes to clean energy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. And next up is Claudia Villery-Lehman from the New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium. That is a mouthful. You have a name?
It is a mouthful. New York Best. So good morning, and thank you so much, Senators, for organizing this roundtable and for the opportunity to testify. As Senator Kruger mentioned, my name is Claudia Villery-Lehman, and I lead the Policy and Regulatory Affairs portfolio for New York Best, representing over 175 companies and organizations working to advance battery and energy storage technology in New York in line with state climate and energy mandates. So as you may be aware, New York has a target of deploying 6 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030, but with only 5 years left to go, 5.5 gigawatts or 92% of the target remains to be built. Despite progress, including the launch of NYSERDA's energy storage incentive programs earlier this year, the industry does continue to face significant financing, permitting, and interconnection challenges. We know that energy storage is essential to a clean, reliable, and affordable electricity grid. Without it, we can't meet the goals of the CLCPA. Energy storage, when paired with renewables, provides clean power on demand, but also when built standalone, it strengthens grid reliability, helps avoid expensive traditional infrastructure upgrades, and reduces costs for ratepayers. According to NYSERDA, hitting the 6 gigawatt goal will save at least $2 billion in energy system costs, and that doesn't even count avoided health costs or economic losses from power outages, which would make the savings far greater. Energy storage also advances equity and environmental justice by directly reducing reliance on peaker plants, cutting pollution that disproportionately harms disadvantaged communities. Analysis by the Peak Coalition shows that replacing New York City's peaker plants with renewables and storage would deliver over $1 billion in additional health and mortality benefits by 2035. So to unlock these benefits, we asked the legislature to advance 3 priorities this session. The first is pass a sales tax exemption for storage to support project financing and level the playing field with fossil fuel equipment, which already receives the tax exemption. And thank you to Senators Parker, Harckham, Krueger, and many others for your support of this bill to date. The second is place bulk storage projects under the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, or ORES, in line with renewables and transmission projects to streamline permitting and ensure the safe and timely development of energy storage. And thank you to Senator Kavanaugh for your leadership on this bill. The third is establish a technology agnostic target for dispatchable emissions-free resources, or DFRs, which the NYISO has indicated are essential to a reliable and decarbonized grid. This will enable a pathway for technologies like long duration storage to cost effectively meet the site's long-term reliability needs. In our written comments, we also talk about priority executive actions like investing in the battery supply chain to bring jobs and manufacturing to New York, and modernizing the interconnection and grid planning processes. So to summarize, energy storage cuts costs, improves health, supports disadvantaged communities, creates jobs, and is indispensable to meeting New York's climate mandates. The industry is ready to build, but we need additional legislative and executive action to make it possible. So thank you so much for your leadership and looking forward to continued collaboration.
You're on mute, Liz.
Don't you hate when we do that? Okay, we've got Deb Peck-Kelleher, the Alliance for Clean Energy New York.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you all for holding this roundtable today. It's a very timely discussion at the very end of Climate Week. And with so many changes in the clean energy transition, this is a needed discussion. As the governor said this morning when announcing the next RFP for renewable projects, while the federal government takes us backwards on energy policy, New York will not be thwarted in its commitment to clean energy. So thank you for moving us forward. I'm Deb Peck-Kelleher, the Deputy Director of the Alliance for Clean Energy New York. We are the voice for clean energy in the state. We are a member-driven organization advocating for renewable energy, building transportation electrification, and energy efficiency. We have submitted testimony outlining items the state can do to move us forward on climate action. For renewable deployment, the state can continue to reduce permitting times at ORES, expedite permit approval at all state agencies. The governor can sign Senator Harkham's bill stabilizing the renewable taxation appraisal methodology. The state can enact Senator Parker's bill for a sales tax exemption for commercial energy storage. It can enact Senator Harkham's bill to raise the distributed solar energy goal to 20 gigawatts by 2035. It can enact Senator Parker's bill to permit energy storage projects under ORES. And the state can include agrivoltaic projects in the ag property tax exemption. To relieve interconnection and transmission issues, the PSC should direct utilities to make interconnection of completed renewable projects a priority. The PSC should select one or more upstate PPTNs to assist in solving transmission constraints and enact Senator Cooney's bill to allow transmission projects in state highway right-of-ways. ACE New York supports NIOA's testimony on the actions needed to support offshore wind. To continue the state's progress on electrifying transportation, Senator Harkham's bill to create a ZEV rebate program should be enacted. We should enact Senator Parker's bill to adopt a clean fuel standard. We should enact Senator Fahey's bill to reduce the sales tax on ZEV purchases. And the Department of State can classify EV charging stations as an accessory use for ease in permitting. For building actions, the state should increase the funding for the Empower Plus program, enact Senator Gonzalez's Green Affordability Pre-Electrification program, create a sales tax exemption for heat pump, and the PSC should create a heat pump rate to reduce electrical cost. We support a cap and invest program and a sustainable futures funding. So thank you so much for allowing us to provide input as the state continues our active climate actions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, all of you. So now, Pete Harcum, would you like to start off questioning?
Sure. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you to all of you. That's great testimony. Gavin mentioned affordability. We know academically a kilowatt of clean energy is cheaper than a kilowatt of natural gas or nuclear or oil or coal. And yet in New York, we have all these barriers. Texas, which doesn't even believe in climate change, all their new generation since their blackout has been in renewables. They've saved their ratepayers $30 billion by their emphasis on renewables. And yet in New York, I hear from developers all the time about the barriers. What can we do in New York to eliminate some of the barriers to open up the potential of affordability of clean energy?
There's some, as you know, it's inherently difficult to work in New York to do any construction. I think some of that's a good thing. We have very strong environmental standards, and that's a good thing. We have very strong labor standards, and that's a good thing. But it does add to time and cost to build in New York. And so I think to compensate for that, the state permitting systems, ORES has made some improvements on the timeframes. There are some specific recommendations in our written testimony about different things that ORES can do to remove those hurdles, but also other state agencies need to work together. I think for some state agencies like DOT, they do their thing and they're not as focused on climate action. And I think that, there are a number of state agencies that don't directly work on climate that need to also take this into consideration, because DOT is really in their best interest. DOT is spending a lot of money rehabbing all these culverts to take care of all this water that's coming from all these increased storms. Like, DOT is already doing climate action. They just think of it as construction. And so I think when they come to them with a permit review that's needed for some construction of renewable projects, they need to also think of that as climate action. So I think there's some smaller things that those non-energy related agencies can also be doing.
Thanks. Others? Yeah, Claudia.
Thanks so much. So I guess building on what Deb was talking about in terms of permitting. So right now, bulk energy storage projects that are 25 megawatts and up do not get permitted at the state level the way that renewables 25 megawatts and up, as well as fossil 25 megawatts and up do. In order to help create a better centralized expert review process with rigorous safety reviews of the project design and installation, we need to have this happen at the state level. Right now, over dozens of local governments have enacted moratoria on energy storage. This is affecting over a gigawatt of projects currently in the interconnection queue, which is a massive number considering that we're trying to get to 6 gigawatts by 2030. And these delays are really threatening the state's ability to meet our clean energy targets. And so having a streamlined permitting process at the state level will enable faster construction, safer construction. On the other opportunities, I want to just talk a little bit more about the sales tax side of things. So commercial energy storage is not exempt from sales tax the way that fossil fuel equipment, solar panels, and other energy generation is. Right now, there are some discretionary pathways where developers can apply for special exemptions through IDAs, but the process to apply is very onerous and very expensive. So it's definitely slowing down development and making projects more expensive. It doesn't make that much sense for the state to be incentivizing energy storage projects on the one hand, and then going around and taxing them, unlike other energy technologies on the other hand. So in order to capture all of the potential benefits to ratepayers that energy storage would provide, we really need additional support.
Great, thank you. Gavin?
I just don't want to be redundant, but I agree with a lot of what Claudia said, Deb. On one hand, you can't get the financing to build a project until you have a permit. That's just the reality of the way it works. And then in other ways, you can't get a permit without the financing. So we have a little chicken and egg scenario. You have NYSERDA that says, okay, we want to build this project, rightly or wrongly. Then DEC says, well, you have to clean up the site before you build on it, or there's a wetland issue. And the lack of coordination amongst the agencies on issuing these permits is really frustrating to the industry when you're talking about these clean energy projects and building them.
Great, thanks. We have 15 seconds left. I say tariffs, you say?
raising the costs of everything, and it's passed on to the ratepayer. Like the tariffs that are faced by the developers in purchasing items to then do construction, passed on to the ratepayers. The tariffs for the utilities in purchasing the transformers needed to upgrade the grid, passed on to the ratepayers. It's costing the state a lot of money.
Great, thanks. All right, last word to Claudia.
I just want to say that one opportunity that I think New York State would have at this moment is, given the federal restrictions trying to, restrict imports, New York could compete for domestic battery manufacturing investment. If we had more support building out manufacturing of batteries here in New York, that could help support the transition and ensure that the transition brings those jobs here to the state.
Terrific, thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'm next, Pete, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So Gavin, Pete referenced Texas as a comparison, and I was going to do the same thing. And given the fact that you represent the power producers, I'm assuming you've looked at what Texas is doing through its equivalent agencies. And why do they seem to be able to move things so much more rapidly than we are able to do so, particularly around solar and batteries? I mean, the new report I saw just yesterday is that ERCOT, ERCOT, I'm not sure how they pronounce it, ERCOT, thank you, has skyrocketed its use of solar and wind and battery storage compared to, I think, pretty much any other state, but they're way ahead of us. What can we learn from them so that we can move faster?
Good question, Senator. One of the things that we fail to recognize sometimes in New York is the vast amount of land that Texas has. You can put stuff up all over Texas and nobody even is knowing it or following it. It is just unlike New York City, where it's impossible to build much of anything. So land use is a huge issue between New York and Texas. Two, Texas does not, for good or for bad, have a climate law of the CLCPA, and you can get permits in 90 days in Texas. It's a big difference. They welcome the investment a lot more than we do here in New York. As you well know, local opposition to a lot of these projects is immense. Claudia talked about that from the battery standpoint. They really don't have that type of feedback and blowback in Texas. And I think it's attributable just because of the vast amount of land they have in Texas to build this stuff.
Although you agree that, yes, obviously New York City doesn't exactly have fallow land, but a lot of upstate New York is literally empty land. Is it just that we don't have the transmission grid to connect back down to the population centers?
That's a big part of it. And the other part of it is just general local opposition to the land use, and local governments putting political pressure on state senators and assemblymen to not support projects in some of these areas of the state. I think those are the two issues.
And you mentioned that the CLCPA added regulations making it tougher to do this. I don't remember that part of CLCPA.
Well, I'm just saying, when you say to the industry, come to New York, and you can't tell the industry how they're going to get a permit because of the CLCPA and how they're going to comply with the DEC regulations. People say it's not an infinite amount of investment. People say, you know what, I don't have to deal with that. I'll go to Texas, I'll go to Ohio, I'll go to Pennsylvania. I'm just saying there's limits on how you get permits in New York compared to other states. And some would argue that's a good thing, and some would argue it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's the reality of the industry on investment dollars, because they're going other places because it's easier to get through the permitting process than it is in New York.
So Deb listed out a huge number of bills that I appreciate her doing so. I think there's a lot of fixes that the legislature could work on with the industry and with the advocates. But I'm curious because Nick and Claudia are sort of in the business of trying to expand wind and energy storage technology. Do you agree that our CLCPA is actually making it tougher for either of you to do your work?
I don't believe the CLCPA makes it tougher. I think it helps with mandating that we actually have to meet legislative goals, right? Like in law, right? So that's for offshore wind. And part of what I mentioned before in my testimony was about transmission. Transmission is a big deal in New York. We have congested corridors. We have very few places where we can land offshore wind, at the very least. And I know that transmission from upstate renewables is also a tough one, but I'll let Deb take that. Getting transmission planning and coordinated transmission planning is key. That's a huge barrier that we're seeing in the offshore wind industry. There's very few places to connect to the large population centers, and Gavin's right. There is local opposition to that, and that could be helped by more communication from the state government to local municipalities, so that there isn't that pressure to oppose a project that's coming in. We, as developers, also have to do the same. We have to be much more communicative, but that is, I think transmission barriers are huge for offshore wind.
And of course, Donald Trump was frightened by a propeller as a child, so that's not helping either, but never mind. Sorry. Claudia, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think outreach and education is absolutely important. We've been ramping up our work on that in partnership with ACE New York, NYSERDA, and others. I think expanding the state's existing community outreach and education is going to be really critical. There's so much misinformation swirling online. We need to clarify the robust, especially for energy storage, safety and regulatory framework that exists in New York. So, NYSERDA and others have already started to demonstrate leadership on that front, but I think a coordinated effort across state agencies and legislative offices, we'd be happy to work together to help communities understand the benefits of energy storage and build more confidence in its deployment and combat some of the pushback. So we're doing more outreach to like the Association of Towns and other organizations to see how we can spread that message. I think we've talked a bunch about permitting on the interconnection side. We do think that there is a huge opportunity for DPS, the Department of Public Service, to work together with utilities and stakeholders to modernize the interconnection process. I think that's not unique to energy storage. It's important for the energy system overall. Right now, it's really based on outdated rules, and it's not designed for renewable technologies, and it's not designed for bidirectional technologies like energy storage. And those inefficiencies and outdated rules are really slowing deployment and also failing to maximize the benefits that things like energy storage could provide to the grid. Right now, a lot of the processes that are happening, for example, through the coordinated grid planning process, is not using the most comprehensive or granular modeling. I think there's a lot of improvements that we can be doing on the modeling side to make sure that our long-term grid investment decisions actually are the best that they can be, and avoid locking in some expensive and potentially unnecessary rate-based investments, rather than figuring out how we can have a more modern grid with maximized potential from energy storage.
Thank you. Okay, I see Brian Kavanaugh's hand up.
Thank you. I don't know if can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. Just Gavin, I think I share Liz's, if what I read, a skepticism of the idea that the CLCPA itself is causing long permitting processes, but I also recognize that you know more about getting projects permitted than I'll ever know. But just, can you talk, if you cited sort of 90 days as an approval time frame in Texas. How long does it take to get a solar or wind generation project permitted in New York?
I mean, Senator, it depends on the site and the community and how much electricity. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. I didn't mean to give the impression the CLCPA, it's just another added barrier on top of, let's say, high taxes or other regulatory matters. Like, it just piles up is all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's another entity that private industry has to look at when they do permitting. Do I have to comply with like the RGGI program? Yes, you do. Well, you don't have to comply with it in Ohio, is all I'm trying to say. It's just a combination of a lot of things. The short answer is, a lot of and I defer to Deb on this too, but a lot of the good sites that we've cited renewable projects on have already been taken. So the low hanging fruit on the renewable side upstate, I think, has already been permitted and built. And now you're getting into more of a controversial projects because of local opposition and other issues associated with that.
And if we wanted to, you mentioned a few, I mean, several people have mentioned agency approvals that are needed, local organizations that get to weigh in. If we wanted to accelerate this, and I can read all your testimony, but are there specific changes in law or approvals or process that you would propose? Like, for example, should we be trying to create more of a one-stop shopping process for approvals where the state agencies are all working on a single application rather than a series of approvals?
I mean, I think you've tried that with ORES, the Rapid Act. The problem is you pass a law and it takes a year to get the staffing up to speed, and the coordination is not there. What I saw in my days back in the 90s at DEC was weekly meetings amongst these agencies, so they weren't surprised about a permit that was going to need to be issued from DEC on a wetlands issue. Like so people knew what was coming as it was coming down the pike, and I think we've gotten away from that in the state. I'd like to see a more of an informal meeting process to talk about what needs are out there between the agencies. Because sometimes I talk to people and it's a big surprise. Well, I didn't know they needed a wetlands permit, or I didn't know they needed a brownfields cleanup. So I think some just informal communication needs to improve.
So it's more process and implementation
That's
than
what I think at this
right
point.
from statutes.
Can I add to that, Senator?
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, I would just echo what Gavin was saying, that, ORES has, and they've made a lot of improvements over the last year. So now their time frame for issuing a permit at ORES is down to 14 months. So it's really, really gotten a lot faster, but you still need to get a wetlands permit. You still need to get, meet local, whatever local zoning is. So you need to still get local permits. So there's a lot of permitting layers in New York that just don't exist in Texas. And that's one of the issues. And that's a good thing. We should have protections in place, but we need a coordinated effort to make sure that that permitting time can be condensed, especially with the investment tax credit going away. And everyone needs to have started construction by July of next year to get that money. And it's a 30% cost reduction that you can get in the ITC, and that's 30% rate savings for ratepayers. So we'd really like to see some coordinated effort by that.
Great. Okay. I realize it complicates subject. I'll end here, but I appreciate your insights and think, be continuing to look at this.
Thank you. Rachel May?
Yeah, thank you to all of the people who have brought their expertise here. So I have a couple of things that I've been trying to work on with transmission, and would love to hear your thoughts about how to get them over the finish line, because we keep passing them in the Senate. One of them is about grid enhancing technologies, which is being used all over the world in a lot of other states to really maximize the flow of energy through the grid. It doesn't take big new investments. It's just a different way of managing the grid. And the other one is to allow leases for green energy on state reforestation land where we already have leases for oil drilling and that kind of thing. But what we really need is to use those lands for transmission, because often they come sit in the way of generation projects and where the big transmission lines are. So just wondering if anybody can weigh in on the value of those things, or if there is a different approach we should be taking to try to amplify our transmission.
ACE supports both of those bills. We're very excited to see them, and we're happy to work with you to move them forward in the Senate and definitely in the Assembly. So I think they're, the access to reforestation land the bill you proposed would be the exact same language that's currently open for natural gas to move their pipelines through forestation land. So I think that would be a very, very much appreciated.
Okay. Anyone else want to say something or ask another question?
I was just going to add really briefly about the grid enhancing technologies. We definitely support that as well. And storage as transmission, or storage as a transmission asset, is something that we've been really advocating for inclusion in the way that the NISO plans for their grid upgrade needs, as well as at the distribution level and through the coordinated grid planning process. So we'd be happy to work with you more on that.
Thank you. Oh, I have another question for Nick. So we know that, the president is trying to kill all offshore wind projects, but a couple of our neighboring states pushed back with a lawsuit, and it seems to be going pretty well. Do you take that as a sign that maybe we will be allowed to continue with our efforts in offshore wind? Or is this going to be a Trump MAGA doubling down against a valuable resource that we should be expanding in New York? I mean, I know your
Kruger,
community talks to each other, so I'm curious.
I appreciate this question. I also don't ever predict what the Trump administration is going to be doing, so I want to preference my comments there. But in the offshore wind industry, yes, Monday was a great day, right? Ørsted had an injunction where the judge actually really reprimanded the federal government, and that was wonderful to see. We're still moving forward with more concrete actions that will be, I guess, stronger when it comes to not having to worry about these stop work orders coming down. That being said, New York is building 2 major offshore wind farms, and we did receive a stop work order, and we worked with the governor, we worked with labor, we worked with the federal administration to come to an agreement where we can move forward with lifting that stop work order. And Haste New York has filed a lawsuit against the executive order, which was where all these stop work orders come from. And we're expecting some kind of decision, I would say, in the near future. No one can ever predict when a judge is going to release a decision, but we had a hearing on September 4th that was positive, if you will. And hopefully we can move forward with the permitting when and if we win that lawsuit. So yes, do I see some positive signs in the offshore wind industry and the actions that have been taken by the federal administration? Yeah, we are seeing a lot of positive outcomes when it comes to the judicial system, and that's an important part of this whole, system, if you will, this whole progress that we're making.
Do you have any sense of, assuming the federal government, quote unquote, leaves us alone and lets people license, what the potential over the next decade is for additional offshore wind generation in New York?
The next decade is going to include a new administration, so it could be a lot more. That being said, we have done many studies in the past, and the current lease areas that are allocated in the New York Bight or right off the Intercontinental Shelf that would feed into the New York market, if you will, it could range from anywhere from an additional 13 to 25 gigawatts of energy, depending on who has those leases, how they are able to set up, and new technology advances in the near future. Our industry has had to be nimble for quite some time now, and as we are nimble, we buckle down, we wait, we make sure that these projects are done properly, but also in a timely manner. We're hoping that we can see a 9 gigawatt injection of energy from offshore wind by 2035 here in New York State, as legislated by the CLCPA. And right now, that's the goal we're working towards, seeing if we can reach that goal with future administrations, or even this one, as permitting, hopefully gets loosened up a little bit there on the federal level.
And I guess for Gavin, so am I correct that we're on target for the new hydroelectric line from Canada coming on board very soon?
Summer of 2026 is the time it's supposed to be into New York City. Now that remains to be seen if it's summer of 2026, but that's the date.
Okay. And that's supposed to provide how much additional energy?
About 1,200 megawatts.
Okay.
Liz, that project is currently going through my district right now in Stony Point.
Okay,
Quite controversial, powers needed, but
Senator,
wreaking
the
havoc
issue
on
is
the
that
local municipality.
demand has grown so much, it's highly, highly unlikely that any of the peaker units will go away, even though Champlain Hudson is installed there because of the load growth. So it's a unique project. It's energy diversity. I just know that it's not going to replace the peakers in the short term.
thank you. Oh, Nick has his hand up again. Yes, sir.
I want to mention something that you kind of touched upon in the very beginning of this panel, was the cost affordability issue that comes with renewables. And Gavin touched upon some of the costs that are coming out of rate payers. But there was a study, Aurora Research Energy, that did a study about the feasibility of downstate energy generation, and it comes to the conclusion that if offshore wind, the three projects that are currently in New York State fully permitted, South Fork Wind, which is currently operational off of Long Island, as well as Sunrise Wind, which is under construction, along with Empire Wind 1, if those three projects were online as of 2025, we would have been seeing a ratepayer savings of $77 to $80 million per month in the cold winter months. So we're talking January, February, March. These are when costs are going to go higher as we electrify New York State more. So those rates could be even more as we, continue to see this. And if we continue to, permit and contract offshore wind, we're looking at stable inflation protected prices for ratepayers for 25 years. So I think it's very important that affordability goes hand in hand with renewables, certainly offshore wind, and I know renewables in general. So that is something I want to stamp on this panel real quick.
Thank you. All right. Last call for any additional questions for this panel. All right, well then, thank you. And thank you all for your very detailed testimony, which we have and will come up on website soon if it's not already up for everyone to take a look at. And on behalf of Climate Week, thank you all for the work you continue to do every day, as frustrating as we know it is for all of us. And with that, I'm going to ask.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Pete. All right, I'm going to ask our talented staff to move you off as panelists and bring on panel number 3, which will be Rewiring America, Michael Hernandez, Building Decarbonization Coalition, Allison Considine, and Building Performance Contractors Association, Jay Best. So let me just see. I see Michael. I see Allison. I am just looking, and I see Jay. Oh, right. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being with us. And we'll just start down the list in the order you're listed at now. So starting with Michael Hernandez. And 3 minutes to summarize your much more detailed testimony.
Thank you, Senators. Really grateful to be here today to talk with you about this very important topic. As we've talked about, the climate law set New York's statutory targets for greenhouse gas reduction goals, set up the Climate Action Council to create a plan to achieve those goals, and also require DEC to create an inventory of where those greenhouse gas emission sources were coming from and updated annually. That report basically found that buildings are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's how we heat our homes, how we heat our water that contributes the most to our greenhouse gas emissions. And so the most direct way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is through our building sector. The law also required the creation of a report on the barriers and opportunities to decarbonize disadvantaged communities to address their disproportionate burden. That report that was authored by 3 state agencies, NYSERDA, DEC, and NYPA found that building codes have a significant impact on disadvantaged communities, decarbonization. And the climate law specifically said, agencies, when you're doing administrative decisions, you're prohibited from continuing that disproportionate disproportionate burden on disadvantaged communities. And you have to prioritize actions that will alleviate that disproportionate burden. And so that, that report found that building codes were really something that needed to be focused on. In 2022, we passed the Advanced Building Codes and Standards Act, which required the state building code to incorporate the key strategies identified by the Climate Action Council into the next building code. New York State only updates its building codes like every 5 years. And they approved the 2025 building code just about 60 days ago. So a relatively new development. And I'll note that everything I'm about to tell you is reviewable for 120 days after that approval. So, there is an opportunity to ask for a review of this administrative decision if it's not in conformance with statutory requirements. Basically, the Building Code Council in the scoping plan said, look, we should have EV readiness for new construction. We should
Michael, we're at time, so if you could summarize, please.
Absolutely. So basically, the plan did not have those things in it. EV storage, energy storage, and also solar readiness. The last thing I'll note is that the Hochul administration is cutting back on the Empower Plus program, which was called to find incentives for low and moderate income households to electrify their homes. This is vitally important. It's the backbone of the clean energy industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Allison Considine, Building Decarbonization Coalition. See, somehow we've set it up so Pete's the bad guy and I'm the pleasant good guy. We can trade halfway through, Pete. Hi, Allison.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable today. And on behalf of the BDC, I want to especially thank Senator Krueger, Senator Harcum, and Senator Parker, who've been such champions of thermal energy networks and neighborhood scale building decarbonization, from Senator Parker's sponsorship of the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act to Senator Krueger's sponsorship of the 100-foot rule repeal bill and the New York Heat Act, and the leadership of all your offices in securing funding for thermal energy networks at state campuses. We're really excited to see the announcement this week that $140 million went to TENS to start construction at University at Buffalo, SUNY Purchase, and Stony Brook University from the Sustainable Future Fund. As Michael just explained, the New York greenhouse gas reduction target of 85% by 2050 means we must decarbonize millions of buildings in just 25 years. BDC really believes that a house-by-house patchwork approach isn't going to cut it. It's going to be too slow, too costly, and inequitable. And we call on the legislature to remove the barriers that are preventing us from advancing a neighborhood-scale building decarbonization movement. And the legislature, agencies, and the Public Service Commission must simultaneously advance solutions that are going to deliver equitable building decarbonization. We think all of this can happen in a way that protects ratepayers and is aligned with the state's overall energy transition with careful planning. Specifically, we think state agencies must set and enforce clear emissions reductions targets and a timeline for gas system downsizing and transition for gas utilities to ensure equitable and lowest cost emissions reductions consistent with CLCPA targets. In the immediate term, actions like Governor Hochul signing A8888 SA417, removing the 100-foot rule line extension allowance, is critical. And that reform must advance to the commission, and New York's legislature must amend the utility obligation to provide gas service so the Public Service Commission members can actually advance climate-aligned gas planning, and so that we can protect ratepayer affordability against the risks of stranded assets and expensive gas pipeline replacements, and so that utilities can redirect the investments from expensive gas pipelines into neighborhood scale building decarbonization, like installing heat pumps into homes and installing thermal energy networks. On the solution side, this fall, there's an opportunity for the Public Service Commission to approve the 6 utility thermal energy network pilots that are currently before them and that have finalized stage 2 filings, to move those to construction, and to work with the utilities to ensure more projects advance towards construction. Again, we want to thank the legislature and the governor for investing in shovel-ready thermal energy networks at state campuses and at the municipal level. And we think next year's legislative budget presents an opportunity to invest in capital projects that will bring even more thermal energy networks to fruition. In addition, we're looking through the state energy plan and potentially through legislative or administrative action for solutions for New York to regulate waste heat so that we can actually capture all of the excess heat in our environment. And so, the most important electron is the one we don't have to generate, and that we can capture and reuse from existing sources. And alongside that, we think the state should double its storage target to 12 gigawatts, with half of that dedicated to thermal storage, again, helping us manage peak demand on the electric side, like we just heard about from the previous panel. How we decarbonize our buildings, doing it at a scale that lets us capture waste heat, leverage thermal storage, and move whole neighborhoods off the gas system together is really, we think, the only way that New York can meet its CLCPA targets while protecting equity, protecting ratepayers, and building a thriving new economy. So thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. And next is Jay Bess.
Morning, Senators Krueger and Harkin. Thank you very much for convening this important roundtable. My name is Jay Best. I'm the CEO of Green Team Long Island, a home performance contractor based on Long Island, and I'm here also representing the Building Performance Contractors Association of New York. Every day, our crews are in New York homes installing insulation, air sealing, and cold climate heat pumps. This is the very work that's needed to achieve the CLCPA targets. But we were faced with reoccurring barriers that slow progress, and I want to highlight several actions that the state can take to help get us back on track. First, long-term consistent funding. Programs open and close unpredictably, creating uncertainty and undermines workforce development investment. Stable, predictable funding is really essential. Second, affordable, accessible financing. There is Green Jobs, Green New York, but we need a statewide and ideally a PACE-style program that removes credit barriers and makes upgrades affordable for all New Yorkers. Third would be simplified administrative processes. Today, contractors and homeowners face excessive paperwork and red tape just to access existing incentives. Streamlining these processes would speed adoption and reduce cost. Kind of along with this is reducing permitting complexity. Electrification projects like heat pumps and panel upgrades often stall to inconsistent municipal requirements. There's literally hundreds of different municipal jurisdictions that we have to comply with as an organization. The state should work with localities to standardize and simplify permitting. Fifth, prioritize insulation. Before installing heat pumps, homes should be properly insulated and air sealed. This ensures smaller systems, lower costs, and better long-term performance. Sixth is around fair electrification rates. Utilities should offer structures that make heating with heat pump with efficient heat pumps more affordable than fossil fuels or electric resistance. Without this, customers may not see the savings that have been promised. Another would be equity for low income. The HEAP program, which is Home Energy Assistance program that provides fuel subsidies, really is not on par for electric heating as it is for oil. And so we find a lot of homeowners, particularly who are eligible for HEAP benefits, will decline a heat pump upgrade because they wouldn't get the same subsidies for electric heating their home as they do with oil. Taken together, we think these actions could unlock contractor capacity, give homeowners confidence, and allow New York to deliver on its climate commitments. So appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Again, I will start with my colleague, Pete Harcum.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all panelists. That was great. You know, as Michael mentioned, as we know, buildings are the largest contributor of emissions. Senator Kavanaugh alluded to in questioning an earlier panel, there's a patchwork of programs to address buildings, both in the state and with utilities and local municipalities, NGOs. Are we investing enough in New York to reach our buildings emissions reduction targets in a meaningful way?
Well, I think what's been really exciting is with the Empower Plus program, which is specifically for low and moderate income households, 1 to 4 family buildings. It's a national model. It's grown 30% year after year. And when you look at NYSERDA's clean energy sector report, 88% of clean energy jobs are those energy efficiency and building electrification jobs. And so the state provided $200 million in 2023 for the Empower Plus program. Unfortunately, yesterday, the governor announced that Empower Plus would only be getting $50 million. That could significantly roll back that program that is a national model and has been really doing well. And the building performance contractors like Jay, I feel like that's going to have significant impacts on their businesses.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of what Michael was saying, that we've seen a lot of ups and downs in terms of the funding, and when he's speaking about the changes to the Empower Plus funding, now, last year, NYSERDA was asking us to build our teams. They had funding to do, needed to do a ton of houses. And this year they're needing to introduce roadblocks to slow down the program because they don't have enough funding to cover all the projects. And so, yes, funding it at the same levels that it has been in previous years would be extremely helpful.
Allison?
And just to add on here, I think especially being aware that residents across New York are going to be losing access to certain federal incentives that have helped them both manage their utility bills and install, decarbonized clean heating and cooling technology. It's going to be especially important for the legislature and the governor to work together and, what we hope to see another $1 billion in the Sustainable Future Fund next year, both to go towards vital programs like Empower Plus, into funding like the $150 million that was recently announced for weatherization through homes and community renewal. And like I was saying, to kind of advance solution side, new innovative technologies like thermal energy networks to actually show, how we can move whole neighborhoods together to be both weatherized and decarbonized. So I think there's going to just be a rising need for state investment to support homeowners in making this transition.
Great. Jay, you want to comment again? And then
Yeah,
Michael?
so, and I want to just, I mentioned the issue of financing, and, the bill, it's such a big thing that there's not enough money in the state budget to, even if the whole state budget went to all the buildings, just through program funding. So, and homeowners get a terrific benefit from this. And so providing easy and affordable financing really allows people, to who are getting the financial benefit from it to also, leverage up and pay for those pay for the improvement. And so I think that that's one thing that really isn't, we love to put money towards low and moderate income. And I think there's certainly a segment that can't afford anything, but a lot of people really just need a leg up and a chance to help pay for it themselves. And that, by some kind of financing is a good way to do that.
Thank you. Michael?
Yep, just wanted to note that the governor announced yesterday the spending plan for the Sustainable Future Fund. He announced $900 million out of the $1 billion. There's $100 million that's unallocated. And I think the Empower Plus program would be a great allocation for that money.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, so Allison, geothermal networked projects. So I know that in my district, we have Rockefeller Center that is going to go geothermal or is in the process of. I'm curious, do we know the status of these various pilots around the state? And what are we learning from them?
Thanks so much for that question, Senator Krueger. So as you noticed, yeah, the Utility Thermal Energy Network projects, which that process was kicked off by the passage of the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act in 2022. The Public Service Commission laid out a 5-step process for each of the 7 investor-owned utilities to put forward thermal energy network projects. Some of them are geothermal, some of them use waste heat capture and other methods and don't even need to have geothermal boreholes. So currently, there are 6 pilots that have done all of their construction, their engineering design. They've developed their customer protection plans. And through October 26th, the Public Service Commission is taking feedback and comment on those projects. In addition to Rockefeller Center, there's one in Chelsea, one in Brooklyn at the Vandalia Houses, which is a NYCHA development, one in Syracuse, one in Ithaca, one in Troy that's still finalizing their stage 2 filing, and one in Haverstraw, New York. I think what's really meaningful about these is they represent a whole diversity of ways to heat and cool buildings that avoids combustion entirely. So like I said, some use geothermal boreholes, some use the wastewater energy from wastewater treatment plants, some capture the waste heat from a grocery store, which needs cooling, or the excess heat from a building like Rockefeller Center, which is dumping heat year round, just up into the sky, wasting it right now. I think that those projects moving forward is going to be really vital to kind of showing a new utility model and developing both bringing industry to New York that is ready to build these. We have thermal energy networks all over the world in operation in Vancouver, in the Nordics, in France. And, there's some already operating in the United States. Like I just mentioned, many of our SUNY campuses are using this technology to heat and cool. And I think what we're really learning is that they show us a new path forward to leverage all of the potential resources in the environment that can provide decarbonized heating and cooling, and to, importantly, I think, create a model for the workers who've been working on the utility gas system, the plumbers, pipe fitters, and steam fitters, the folks who've been laying that pipe in the street, to actually have a viable transition plan into the decarbonized economy. And to create compliance strategies for some of the densest areas in our country, both for local Law 97 and for total decarbonization. So I would just encourage also, the senators on this group to file support in the Public Service Commission docket for those projects, because I think it's really an exciting way to move this forward in our state.
I guess for any and all 3 of you, are there, so I learned about geothermal, I think, from Allison originally, actually. And then I discovered that I actually have several buildings in my district that have been built with geothermal. And I sort of laughed originally because I thought, really, do you know what's underneath Manhattan Island? Like whole cities of other things going on down there. Is geothermal something you could do in Manhattan Island? And apparently the answer is yes. But there's other models that are moving forward. I just came back from a visit with the Canadian government, and they were proudly showing off all of their new energy opportunities. And they have, I think, at least one company that does the cladding on buildings that make the whole outside of a building solar. And then I just put in a bill yesterday because I was so excited about this model where you do solar panels that you just plug into your wall socket sitting on your terrace outside your apartment or hung off the side of your building. And I'm just curious, I mean, this is sort of your territory, Jay, I think specifically, but like, are there more things we should be trying to speed along with that obviously helps us with decarbonization and meet CLCPA, but maybe we need to change some of our laws to make it easier for these things to actually become the norm. I'm just curious whether you all have seen any of these other models. I think China has solar panels, that are just all the windows of a building. would actually be solar. And I guess I read something that trying to do a giant new building using the solar glass is potentially completely feasible, but pulling all the glass out of your 80-story high rise and starting again, probably not so realistic. So I'm just curious, like, who's looking into this to make sure we have all these potential options, you know, for suburban, rural, and densely populated urban areas.
Just to offer sort of zoomed out a little bit, I do think this is the kind of case where like there's so much innovation, but we really need to unlock economies of scale to make it affordable, which is why, you know, BDC is so excited about the prospect of a neighborhood scale transition so we can actually leverage bulk purchasing to drive down the cost of some of these new technologies. And we can also make sure that they're installed in a way that's going to deliver the best performance by leveraging project labor agreements and, you know, other agreements to make sure that it's, you know, unionized workers who are installing these technologies. I do think, you know, I want to give credit to NYSERDA, whose Empire Building Challenge and other, you know, sort of like award innovation programs have really driven forward a lot of exciting innovation in the space, including, you know, window mount heat pumps that can just be plugged into a regular outlet. And to, you know, the utilities who've been partnering with certain companies like this for these thermal energy network projects to actually bring new innovation in. But I think, you know, at a broad scale, we need to support building owners and really the industry in figuring out how to do this. Not just each building on their own tries to figure out how to leverage these technologies, but how are we bringing a, you know, community scale approach to this and using that to both unlock economies of scale and, you know, create good jobs pathways.
So I'll just say three things in 30 in 10 seconds. So I think hyperscalers, you know, like data centers and, you know, big company, Micron, you know, coming to the state with a high energy demand, we can utilize those kind of opportunities to invest in homes as energy infrastructure by electrifying those homes, by putting demand response into those buildings. We can find capacity in our homes to help power those big economic boosters. And so I think that is something that we should be looking at. Here in Albany, we did geothermal at Steamboat Square, a multifamily affordable housing, dramatically decreased the amount of energy that was being used there. And in Queens, we replaced at a NYCHA housing project all air source heat pumps in each of the units, which brought down energy consumption by like 80%. And the residents loved it. They loved their air source heat pumps. So I think those are the types of large scale projects that are also available.
Jay, do you have any perspective from sort of the building contractor's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you on like an individual house, you know, it is hard to do geothermal and in a lot of cases. So doing, you know, a neighborhood at a time where now everybody has access to that in the same way that they would, you know, their gas infrastructure starts to make it easier. You know, when you start looking at, you know, the permitting and the you know, requirements to do one house at a time with geothermal, it's really very involved. And that's why the vast majority of heat pumps right now are air source heat pumps. But I think, you know, if we can have a different approach to it, that certainly opens the door for doing a lot more geothermal through these neighborhood, you know, district kind of systems.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I see Brian Kavanaugh with his hand.
You, Senator Krueger. Thank you, Senator Harkin. Thanks, everybody testifying. A couple questions. First, I'm just to Senator Krueger's point of view about all that stuff that's underneath the streets of our respective districts. A lot of that stuff is actually heat generating. There's a lot of energy out there. You know, I had the opportunity to be out in Vancouver and see what they're doing with the sewage system as the source for thermal energy networks, because it's a, you know, reliably warm source of energy, and you know, it's hotter when the weather gets cold. So I think, you know, I think we have a lot of opportunities to explore ways of getting the heat that's trapped in our subway systems, heat that's being pushed out of buildings and just into the air and wasted. I guess for anybody, particularly, well, actually for anybody, what do we need to do? I've seen the Steamboat site up in Albany. I visited 345 Hudson. There's some fascinating things going on there. I've seen those window heat pumps out in Woodside, which I think, and the fact that a state agency and a affordable housing provider managed to induce the world to produce an appliance that didn't exist, a single unit window heat pump, is an amazing success of that program. And we have Medea and a smaller provider startup providing those units, and NYCHA expects to acquire 30,000 of them. But I agree that trying to figure out how to get thermal energy networks at the neighborhood level is essential. And my question is, beyond kind of, we kind of mandated that SUNY do it. We're funding pilots in various places, but what do we need to do to make it such that somebody who wants to create a thermal energy network can plan it, get it permitted, and start installing it and signing up buildings?
I'm so glad you asked this question. The number one barrier to this is the utility's obligation to provide gas service. So until the legislature is able to reform the utility obligation to provide gas service and make it a obligation to provide energy service, or allow that obligation could be met via, heating and cooling from thermal energy networks, it's going to be very hard to scale this technology beyond single owner campuses or the utility pilots. And even within the utility pilots, that utility obligation to provide gas service has been a barrier to getting the scale of customer sign up needed. The reason that's such a barrier is it creates this massive hurdle to having the certainty that if you make that investment, you will actually be able to, transition that neighborhood. And I think importantly, this is a newer technology we're seeing in the pilots, that there's certain contingencies built in because they're pilots, right? Pilots cost a little bit more because you're doing something new. But we are putting a lot of money into pipelines right now. It costs about $6 million per mile to replace a gas pipeline in New York. And in more expensive areas, it's up to $10 million per mile. So if we could avoid putting that $6 million into that mile of pipeline and instead redirect that funding into a thermal energy network, it would both facilitate the financing and make sure that we're not making ratepayers pay for two systems. And I think that piece is really critical. But again, until we amend that utility obligation to provide gas service, SUNY campuses, these utility pilots are sort of the only places where we're going to see this move forward, and we're not going to get to scale in a way that's going to let us really leverage all of those waste heat resources that we know are just, going up into our environment right now and not actually being used to heat and cool homes. So I think that's the number one barrier that needs to be addressed.
Could you articulate just a little more precisely? So, got a neighborhood, you think you've got, good options for heat sources, and you want to build a network. What is how exactly does the gas, the obligate? Is it that you effectively can't make the buildings transition to the new system because they have gas and they're happy, and the utility can't tell them, we're not going to do gas, we're going to do thermal energy network at this point as a replacement?
So here's how I would put it. So we think the utilities are a good candidate to build thermal energy networks because, they have the capital, they have the experience laying pipe in the street. But if you have a neighborhood where there is existing gas pipe, any one customer, even if it's just one tenant of one building, who wants to continue receiving that gas service, even if it means that you're going to have to invest $6 million of ratepayer money in that gas line replacement, they have to keep that gas line in the street. So, they could put a thermal energy network in, but having that dual system is going to raise costs significantly for ratepayers. This really makes sense when you're transitioning from that gas system to the thermal energy network system instead, and leveraging the fact that rather than investing ratepayer money in a gas pipeline and at the same time investing ratepayer money in a, water pipeline and only having a handful of the buildings exchanging heat with that, like the finances of this, the space constraints of this, et cetera, really make sense when you are actually affecting that full transition. And I think we're seeing in the utility pilots, for example, there's one of them right now, the Chelsea pilot in Mount Vernon, where they actually, identified a section of leak-prone pipe, which is, a lot of New York's gas pipelines are leak-prone. This is a section of pipe from 1890. And it's kind of remarkable to think that we have infrastructure moving combustible material that's from 1890 in our streets. And they're actually looking at retiring 500 feet of that pipe because they're putting that thermal energy network in. That's the kind of thing that's going to really make this economic, both for ratepayers and for this kind of utility business model. So that's sort of the heart of it. But, I welcome, obviously, Michael, Jay, if you want to chime in here.
Okay.
Just a quick response. And, I think you talked about, how current infrastructure is very wasteful, very inefficient. And I think what we're seeing is that New York is on the cusp of needing to make investments in its energy infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure currently is very old. And so instead of investing in older technologies that, have health impacts, such as fossil fuel combustion systems, we can update those energy systems for thermal energy networks or electrify those areas so that we don't have to pay for a gas system and an electric system, and also we can make that infrastructure better performing so that it's demand response and more affordable and more efficient. So I think that those, just echoing what Allison said, getting rid of that obligation to serve and allowing for utilities and customers to do more innovative, more modern systems will bring down costs and make things more affordable and more efficient and clean.
And I mean, statutory change would basically be to say that if you're providing a thermal energy network to a given geography, you do not need to provide, you're relieved of the obligation to provide gas service in that geography.
Or really just, we have a fuel specific obligation to serve in New York. So it does literally say gas. In many states, it's an obligation to provide service. So it can be met in different ways. And I think that's the important thing here. So not every neighborhood maybe is going to be right for a thermal energy network. It might make sense to electrify the homes in that neighborhood with a combination of air source heat pumps, single family geothermal heat pumps, what have you. So I think it's really changing that obligation to provide gas service to an obligation to provide energy service, recognizing that in each neighborhood, what is the most economic option, what is the most affordable option for the ratepayers is going to depend on the environment, the resources available in it. But right now, the Public Service Commission, when a utility comes forward with a rate case and they say we're looking at having to replace this many miles of gas pipeline in our service territory to the tune of millions, and as that infrastructure is going to last for a long time, billions of dollars, they're not able to really put forward alternative solutions and say, here, the most affordable option for ratepayers would be, let's actually retire this section of gas pipeline, electrify these homes instead, serve them maybe with a thermal energy network, maybe just have them upgrade to air source heat pumps and other all electric equipment, because that's going to be the cheapest option for ratepayers. Because we have that fuel specific obligation rather than a obligation to provide energy or listing out alternative ways that obligation could be met. The Public Service Commission's hands are really tied because the utility would need every single customer who already has gas service to agree, which is as an organizer, a massive organizing project that really doesn't line up with the way we should be doing infrastructure planning to protect ratepayer affordability, and kind of, transition our utilities to a more modern model that's going to comply with the CLCPA.
Thank you very much. Just a question, I think it's probably best for Jay Best, no pun intended, but the barriers to getting individual homeowners. I mean, I understand that in some jurisdictions, especially European ones, you can, decide you want solar.
Brian, just mindful of time, please.
Okay, quickly.
We're way over.
How long does it take to get solar and heat pumps and other things approved for your home and installed, and what could we do to accelerate that?
So,
Anybody?
so on the permitting end, it can take as little as a couple of weeks, but sometimes it can take, depending on the particular building department, it can take weeks or even months to get fully permitted. And that's really one of the issues statewide is just how heterogeneous our permitting environment is. As far as the programs, it typically takes several months to get through all of the hurdles to have all the approvals through like Empower Plus or some of the utility programs. So that's one thing. I did want to bring up that a big issue, particularly when you get into market rate homeowners who have a lot more choice about where they're going with this, is there's a lot of apprehension. And so we get a lot of homeowners who, maybe they'd be interested in electrifying part of their home or keeping their fossil fuel as backup. And a lot of times the programs are designed in a way that you don't get the incentives unless you do your whole home. And not only that, you have to do it all at once. And so and in a lot of cases, you have to disconnect your fossil fuel system, in order to receive some of these incentives. And there's a lot of apprehension, yeah, I want to be right by the environment, but I've had oil for so long, and I know it works in the middle of winter, and I heard that heat pumps are, don't always work when it's really cold. So, if we can give them a chance to try it out, maybe you do, the new addition gets heat pumps, and then when you're really happy with that, we can do the rest of your house when your boiler craps out. So but currently the programs are designed in a way where, it's kind of all or nothing.
Okay, that's helpful. I mindful of time, I'll leave it there and apologize to my colleagues for going on a bit here, but thank you. This has been very, very helpful.
I have one more, I guess, broad-based question. So it's not CLCPA, but we passed a different bill, the Build Public Renewables Act, which made new requirements on the New York Power Authority to move forward with expansion of sustainable energy. I'm curious what any of you think, how that bill is actually being implemented, and where is NYPA from the perspective of where you all think it ought to be. I think they had proposed as of July of this year, bringing the total number of projects they're working on to 7 gigawatts of various renewable. Is that adequate? Is that what we hope for? Are those actually renewables? I just don't know enough to even know how to ask that question better.
Well, I think, I'll just say that, NYPA and its initial kind of, proposal suggested 3 gigawatts. And, and I think they came back because of the overwhelming feedback was that's simply not enough. And then now they've come back with a 7 gigawatt. But I think people are really thinking that at least for this first tranche, it should be 15 gigawatts of renewable energy. I'll also just note that really a lot of the projects that they're proposing are in collaboration or in coordination with private entities, and not really NYPA individually kind of going and developing those projects on its own. So I think there is opportunity from that legislation to enable them to do projects in collaboration with private developers, but to also go and see what opportunities are available as a public authority to do it on their own as well.
Thank you. I don't see the other 2 people raising their hands, but I see Rachel May back on screen. So let me jump to Rachel to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of a follow-up. So we toured some thermal energy networks in Vancouver that were using waste heat from just the solid waste system, the wastewater system. And it raised a question for me about how that kind of heat would be categorized. Is that considered a renewable source of energy? And if you extended it to things like data centers that are putting off a huge amount of heat, and you were grabbing the heat from data centers to heat a district energy project or something, would that be considered renewable? Do we have ways of categorizing these kinds of sources of energy?
I'll need to follow up with you on like the specific categorization, but I think really advancing a program to actually require that waste heat is captured and used, and to incentivize generators of waste heat, whether they be a data center or a wastewater system or a transportation system, is kind of the next frontier of making sure that we're leveraging that heat to decarbonize our buildings, and not just kind of dumping it into the environment. So, I mean, I think something like, the DEP system or, any wastewater treatment system. Right now, we are just, flushing that heat down the drain. So I do think capturing it, at like the ideal level, I would consider that to be renewable energy because it's energy that is, just available in the environment to us. It's going to be there. I don't see people stopping taking hot showers or running their dishwashers anytime soon. And it represents such an opportunity to avoid having to, use electricity to, generate that heat elsewhere or, run a fossil gas fired, boiler to generate that heat. So I think it's really an exciting opportunity, but we do think that the state should advance regulations to actually require, the use of that waste heat. And that also ties into that piece I mentioned around doubling the state's storage target. Waste heat really can act like a thermal storage resource. And I think if we are, looking at the overall grid, if we're using energy from the grid to, run these data centers, some of that energy is just going out in the form of heat. And so we can capture it, that's a really, really big opportunity. So I think of that as a renewable resource, but as far as how it's like categorized in terms of, incentives or other things, I would have to follow back up with you.
There was a project we saw where they had a housing development with a large grocery store in it, and the grocery store they considered a source of, they called it, they do heat rejection because they are cooling all the time, and so they were taking the heat from that as part of the source for the energy. So figuring out how we do a better job of this kind of comprehensive planning, if you will, that would allow for co-development of sources of heat and sources of heat rejection or whatever, that it would make a lot of sense if we could figure out how to incentivize that kind of development.
And just to flag, the utility thermal energy network pilot in Brooklyn, that National Grid has put forward at the Vandalia houses does capture waste heat from a grocery store that's right next to those NYCHA houses, exactly like you're discussing. I think that was probably the LLM development in Vancouver. And I think another just like benefit of using this waste heat is because it's, just being dumped into the environment anyways, figure out how to incentivize producers of waste heat to put it in while still maintaining really, really low energy bills. I know the residents of that development that uses both wastewater energy heat and the rejected heat from the grocery store pay, very, very low per square footage energy bills that are fixed over the years. They don't have that price volatility in the winter or the summer. Wastewater energy is about 70 degrees year round. So I think it also really insulates customers from those price spikes in a way that would be important for the affordability conversation we're having.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, right. Oops, sorry. Making sure. Oh, good. Hi, I'm still on. So I think I'm now going to thank the three of you for your participation today. And we again have everybody's full testimony, even though you all got very small amounts of time to provide summaries. So again, thank you so much for your work on behalf of us all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And now I'm going to call up our fourth panel, but apparently a sudden emergency is preventing the third person from participating. So it will not include Melissa Parrott from Renewable Energy Long Island, although she has submitted testimony. And it will include Jonathan Cohen, New York Solar Energy Industries Association, and Keith Hayes, New York Geothermal Energy Organization. So we're bringing both gentlemen on. I see them both. So I thank you for being here with us. Thank you for submitting more detailed testimony. But as I think you've already seen, we're going to ask each of you to keep it. Well, since we lost one panelist, let's make it 4 minutes each instead of 3 minutes each. So you have a little more time to go into things, and then we will ask you questions. So why don't we start with Jonathan?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. And you know that succinctness is not one of my strengths, so I appreciate the extra 60 seconds. For folks who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm the policy director at the New York Solar Energy Industries Association. I do really appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the implementation of the CLCPA and really to speak candidly about where we stand, what's working, and what needs urgent attention. I want to start with the reality, which is that New York is not on track to meet its statutory climate obligations under the CLCPA. At the same time, energy affordability has become a central concern for households across the state. These kind of dual challenges of climate and cost really demand solutions that deliver on both. And one bright spot in New York's clean energy efforts that does exactly that has been distributed solar. Its deployment is ahead of schedule, it is under budget, and it's delivering direct bill savings to consumers as we speak. Distributed solar also helps avoid costly grid upgrades. It supports local jobs and advances both the CLCPA's climate objectives and also Governor Hochul's affordability agenda. So this convergence of climate and affordability priorities is exactly why now is the time for New York to double down on distributed solar and storage and invest in the workforce that makes it possible. All of that said, there have been some recent decisions that really are threatening to undermine this progress. Earlier this year, the Public Service Commission rescinded $271 million from New York's low-income solar programs. And at the same time, the Trump administration slashed $249 million from similar programs. These are really short-sighted decisions that will make energy less affordable for New Yorkers and slow our climate progress. Meanwhile, the federal phase-out of clean energy tax credits really underscores the urgency of state-level action. And it's one of the reasons that I really appreciate the two of you convening this group, because New York really needs to lead in reforming permitting and interconnection processes to eliminate red tape and drive down costs. And there are legislative solutions that are already on the table that can help. One of the most impactful steps that the legislature can take as soon as you all reconvene is to pass the Accelerate Solar for Affordable Power Act, the ASAP Act that's sponsored by Senator Harckham. That would set a more ambitious solar deployment target and reform interconnection processes to reduce those costs. You can also enact community solar siting reform. That would address unreasonably restrictive local laws and moratoria that are obstructing gigawatts of community solar. And then you could implement automated permitting for residential solar projects that would keep those projects affordable. Each of these bills would remove barriers, they'd reduce costs, and expand access to clean energy with no fiscal impact to the state. So I'll wrap up on a hopeful note. The CLCPA provides a framework for this transformation. Distributed solar provides a pathway to achieve it. So by scaling up distributed solar and storage, reforming outdated processes, and investing in affordability, we really can put New York back on track to meet our CLCPA mandates and deliver real economic benefits to New Yorkers at the same time. So I thank you for your time and consideration, and I clearly needed the extra seconds, so thank you.
Thank you very much. And next up, also giving you 4 minutes, Keith Hayes.
Good afternoon, and I would like to thank you, Senator Kruger, Harckham, and Kavanaugh, and the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Keith Hayes, and I represent the New York Geothermal Energy Organization, also known as New York Geo. It's a nonprofit trade association dedicated to promoting clean, reliable, and affordable geothermal heating and cooling in New York. I think we could all agree that we have a challenge. We know that buildings are responsible for about 31% of New York's greenhouse gas emissions, and that's mostly from burning oil and gas for heating and hot water. Under the CLCPA, we're legally bound to reduce emissions by 85% by 2050, and to achieve that, we need to rapidly transition away from fossil fuels and toward zero emission heating. So my focus is on geothermal, and more specifically, ground source geothermal systems, including thermal energy networks, as we just heard, are one of the most reliable and cost-effective solutions we have. Both the state's 2022 Climate Action Scoping Plan and the draft 2025 State Energy Plan identify geothermal as a cornerstone of New York's clean energy future. And here's why. Geothermal is affordable. It lowers energy bills today and protects households as the grid shifts to winter peaking. It's also highly efficient, 3 to 5 times more efficient than burning fossil fuels. It's reliable in all weather, summer or winter. It's durable. The subsurface loop is protected and can last for more than 50 years. It's also scalable, serving single homes or entire neighborhoods, as we just heard. It's also equitable. It reduces long-term costs for low and moderate income households. And lastly, it's grid friendly. Geothermal draws 60 to 80% of its energy directly from the earth, reducing the need for costly electric grid buildouts. Now, just importantly, geothermal can create thousands of good union jobs and provide a just transition for gas utility workers whose skills translate directly into drilling and network installations. To recognize progress so far, the legislature has already shown real leadership, passing the CLCPA, creating and expanding a state geothermal tax credit, enacting the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, passing the All-Electric Building Act, reforming borehole depth regulations, and repealing the 100-foot rule that subsidized new gas hookups. These steps have somewhat leveled the playing field and lay a foundation for growth. So with that all being said, what do we need to do next? Well, there are barriers that still remain, and more action is needed if geothermal is going to scale to the levels required. New York Geo urges the legislature to take the following steps. First, scale thermal energy networks, require utilities to include them in long-term planning, and create a bonding authority to finance both networks and individual loops. Second, create a geothermal renewable energy credit market. By valuing geothermal environmental benefits, we can reduce customer bills, attract investment, and follow the successful example already set by the state of Maryland. 3, pass a sales tax exemption for geothermal equipment, just as we already do for solar. 4, invest in workforce development, expand union-led training, and establish an Office of Just Transition so workers can move into high-quality geothermal jobs. 5th, expand rights-of-way access for drilling in urban areas where space is limited. And 6, align bonus depreciation rules with the federal policy to enable third-party ownership and eliminate upfront cost barriers. With respect to policy opportunities beyond legislation, we also urge support for non-legislative actions such as ensuring that at least 35 to 40% of geothermal investments flow to disadvantaged communities, and revising utility rate structures so that geothermal's grid benefits are fully recognized. In closing, ground source geothermal represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to cut emissions, lower energy bills, create union jobs, and meet our CLCPA goals in a way that supports rather than strains the grid. With your continued leadership, New York can lead the nation in geothermal deployment and deliver a cleaner, fairer energy future for all New Yorkers. I thank you and I welcome your questions.
Thank you both very much. I'm gonna give it to Pete Harcum to start us off.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you both very much for your testimony. Question for both of you. A lot of, let me put it this way. Your industries are very dependent on national policy as well. What do the Trump administration's trade policies, i.e. tariffs, what's the impact on your industries, as well as any tax changes in the recent tax bill? How will that impact your industries?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that, Senator. I would start by saying first that the federal budget that was passed this summer, I can only describe it as a staggering, unprecedented, heartbreaking betrayal of our core American values. But it is having a tremendous impact on our industry. There have been, for the last 20 years, there have been federal incentives available to offset the cost of solar. They were first established under the George W. Bush administration. And at the residential and commercial level, they offset 30% of project costs. I'd argue that those are foundational to the growth of our industry. Those incentives weren't created by the Inflation Reduction Act, but President Biden did extend them in the IRA. And so they've been sort of pulled into the conversation about that in the recent federal budget reconciliation. What they've done is they've eliminated the residential tax credit for homeowners who purchase solar at the end of this calendar year. So that right away means that if you're looking to put solar on your house, it's going to cost 30% more next year than it did this year. They are phasing out the tax credit for commercial projects and leases. Those projects now either have to commence construction before July 4th of next year, or they need to be placed in service by the end of 2027. In New York, we've got a lot of red tape. It takes 3 to 4 years to develop a community solar project. And so what you're seeing right now is a scramble for projects and for companies to decide what of their projects are viable and can continue, can commence construction in time to still qualify for the tax credit, and which ones won't. The other thing that the legislation does is enact the most restrictive foreign entity of concern, which are basically domestic content requirements that we've ever seen. And so it's making it more challenging because we've been scaling up our capacity for domestic manufacturing of solar components, but it is not at a level yet where we can meet the demand. And so by really restricting where those components can come from, it's further stifling the industry. All
Jonathan,
of this.
don't mean to cut you off, but I want to give Keith some time to respond to. I've only got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. So I'll wrap up. Basically, all of this has made it really critical that we drive down costs and eliminate that red tape so that those projects can continue to move forward.
Great, thank you. Keith?
Thank you, Senator. So the federal clean energy tax credits for geothermal systems will decrease to 26% in 2033, 22% in 34, and then expire in 2035. So that's put great pressure, on this industry, which is the reason we're asking for a bonus depreciation, so that New York can align its rules with the federal laws and have third-party ownership, deducting the cost of geothermal systems immediately when placed in service. The other thing we were focusing on is what was already passed in a bipartisan manner in 2015, and that's the sales tax exemption. But because it was passed outside of the budget, it was vetoed by the governor. So there are two areas where I think we can reinforce and support and incentivize ground source geothermal systems in New York State. I just don't think we're going to get any additional help from the federal government in that respect.
All right, great. Thank you both. Well, actually, I have 30 seconds left. Quick question for Jonathan. We talk about ORES and the backlog there, but we don't talk about the backlog at ISO. ISO is always screaming for more power, and yet there are all these projects in their pipeline. Talk about the challenges your industry has with ISO and getting approvals there.
So NYSEA represents distributed scale solar and storage. So we're not actually interfacing with the ISO. Our projects are permitted at the local level. So the challenge that's impacting our projects is actually those restrictive local laws and moratoria that have been popping up over the last several years. We did an analysis that found that it's obstructing about 4.5 gigawatts of otherwise viable community solar deployment. So one of the things that we're looking for the legislature to do is put some bumpers on the lane for siting. We understand that New York is a home rule state. We respect the right of local communities to make their own decisions. But Senator Parker introduced legislation that would enact a set of statewide guidelines to sort of sanity check local zoning and permitting laws. That would go a long way toward helping our projects move forward, because that's the source of the challenges that we're facing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Oops, am I on? Yes, can you hear me? Okay, so I guess the first question is for Jonathan. And it's a follow-up to what I think Pete was heading towards, which is, yes, we're a home rule state, and yes, we have local zoning laws and concerns, but we also are not that different than a lot of our surrounding states. Are they doing this better? And what should we be learning from them? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're not doing it better. Maybe it takes them just as long to permit anything.
So some of them are and some of them aren't. I will say that permitting is one of the top challenges facing our industry nationally. So this is not a problem that's unique to New York. But other states are, especially now, in light of the federal budget cuts, recognizing that there is an important role for them to play in making sure that the industry can survive. And so they have announced strategies to accelerate permitting and interconnection, to prioritize projects that are able to move forward. Many of them have enacted automated permitting regulations. They all look a little bit different. So in some cases, it's requiring an automated platform. In other cases, it's a state level permitting process. But there are examples that New York can look toward. We are one of the few states, or what I guess I'll call blue states, that has not announced a real comprehensive strategy in response to the federal budget cuts. We've shared what we would hope that response would be with the executive, and I know that I've had conversations with all of you, and the legislature is incredibly supportive there. But there is a lot that New York could be doing right now to make a difference.
And obviously, when you got solar, you need battery storage, right? And it does seem that some of our communities are pushing back against building of battery storage facilities, because I really think a lack of understanding that they're thinking, I'm from New York City, so we all talk about e-bike batteries blowing up and starting horrendous fires. But storage batteries for energy and mass energy is not the same technology. We asked this question of one of the earlier panelists who said NYSERDA is trying to do more public education about this. And I was in Canada talking to them about energy, I guess last week. I think Brian Kavanaugh was on the west coast of California, and I stayed east with the eastern provinces of Canada. We'll have to coordinate our plans later. And I asked them, how did they deal with battery storage concerns? And they said they don't have any. Nobody's worried about it. I go, really? They go, no. When we first started talking about it years ago, we agreed to fund like pilots in X number of communities, and the pilots got built and everything was fine. And we started talking about how everything was fine and we needed this kind of energy going forward. And everybody went, oh, okay, never mind, we're fine. So are we not doing that right here? And should we be looking to our neighbors in the north or somewhere else to help educate people about why putting a battery storage facility somewhere near your residential communities is just not the concern that some people seem to be spreading? And it's nothing compared to the concerns of doing more oil and gas and other kinds of existing energy and the risks from them. So what's your experience on that from various states?
Yes, Senator, you hit several nails on the head. It has always amazed me that you can see a news story about a house that exploded from a gas leak, and we sort of pause for a moment and send our thoughts and prayers, and then we move right on. The idea of installing battery storage terrifies people. And you're right, the sentiment is almost entirely disassociated from the facts. And we've done a terrible job, not only New York as a state, but as an industry. I think we have not done as well as we should on public education front. NYSERDA is stepping up, and they are going to be rolling out a public education campaign. But the challenge, and I wish I had a better solution to offer, is for folks to trust that education campaign. Like, how do we make folks trust the ads and community events that are going to be held to show the truth about battery storage? How do we make people trust that more than what they see on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok? And I think like that I'm not sure about. The data is overwhelming. I mean, I think Tesla has installed 1 million Powerwall batteries, and there's been one fire that wasn't even demonstrably related to the product itself. They're incredibly safe. But you highlighted what I think is the source of a lot of the fear is these e-mobility devices and those batteries that are not regulated, that are coming in from overseas, that are not UL listed. They haven't been tested the same way. And that's what's scaring people. I will credit New York City. They are in the process of doing rulemaking with regard to those unregulated batteries to expand the existing law to make it illegal to possess those. And we are strongly in support of that. And we've tied it to our efforts to make sure that to make the distinction between those batteries and the safe, regulated, and well-tested batteries that our industry is installing every day. That those batteries need a reasonable permitting pathway, while we fully support eliminating the unregulated batteries. It's going to take a lot of work, and I don't know that I'm giving you a great answer,
That's okay.
but it's one of the things that we're
we
working
need
on.
to do this, and we've jumped over time. And I have another question for Keith, but we'll circle back to me after other people ask. So I see Brian Kavanaugh's hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I also found the clock. I've now posted on my screen.
Exactly.
My Zoom skills have now advanced a bit. So for Jonathan, you mentioned that local obstacles include zoning and land use issues. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, is it that a site needs to be rezoned in order to permit a community solar facility, or is it like a battle to convince people that it's within the existing zoning? Or how does that usually play out? Like, on what basis are localities objecting to these projects?
So what's happening is when they are establishing those local zoning and permitting guidelines, they're doing it in a way that obstructs solar development. So a couple of examples is you could have a requirement in a community for 1,000-foot setback on a 1,000-foot lot. Or a community will pass a law that says you can only develop solar in an industrially zoned area, which sounds fine until you realize that they don't have one. So really that's a ban. And then a lot of communities are going into moratoria, more for storage, but also to some extent for solar, to give them the opportunity to develop those guidelines. But then instead of developing a fair and reasonable process and ending the moratoria, they just continue to renew them.
Currently is larger solar projects go through, or what is the scale of it, like a typical community solar project?
Community solar projects are no bigger than 5 megawatts. So you're talking about, a couple dozen acres. They're dwarfed by the utility scale projects that are hundreds of megawatts and could be 1,000 acres.
And ORAS applies currently to projects that are greater than 25, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, we hear this with respect to housing and other, there's been a lot of efforts to try to we're one of the only states in America where we haven't stepped in and kind of tried to address localities blocking housing that we all know we desperately need. I mean, what would other than educating people, and now, as you know, I carry the battery bill, and I've heard some very crazy opposition. I also, just side note, but I was with a global trade association with people from dozens of countries, and I told people about this opposition, and they just said that doesn't happen anywhere. So it's perplexing. But I mean, what would a solution to this look like other than, I don't know, educating people and convincing local governments to stop blocking this stuff?
So, I mean, in our view, what a solution looks like is the state setting some guidelines for what is a reasonable zoning or permitting law. And the legislation that's been introduced does that while still making sure the local communities they continue to have permitting of rooftop and community solar. And it leaves them a lot of latitude to customize those laws to suit their needs in many ways. But it does say, here's what a reasonable setback is. Here's what these other sort of reasonable standards would be that you need to follow. And it's just the state saying, look, we're a home rule state. Yes, you have the ability to make a lot of these decisions for yourselves, but we also have to balance local control with the urgency that we have to build out renewables as quickly as we can. We have sort of these dueling mandates in New York, and we need to just figure out how to harmonize them.
I mean, it sounds like you'd still have a lot of litigation and other things about whether they're complying with that or whether their standards are meeting the state standards. So, I mean, I'd like to have a further conversation, but my time's up.
Sure.
So, thank you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Pete, do you have more questions?
No, I'm good, thanks.
All right, so then I'm going to use some extra time that we have to ask Keith a couple of questions. So, and I'm not sure I even understand where the question came from, but I like it, so I'm going to take a stab at it. Why should geothermal wells deeper than 500 feet be regulated differently than we regulate oil and gas wells of the similar depth?
We changed that, Liz.
We did?
We did. We passed a law 2 years ago that is no longer the case for geothermal, and the governor signed it.
That's right.
Well, thank you for being the chair of the right committee, because I missed that one completely.
Just thought I would chime in.
No worries.
Well, perfect. Thank you. So then Keith, the newest question.
You're on mute.
Liz, you're on mute again.
Oh, sorry, my mouse isn't working right. So I read about what's happening in the MTA every day, because you can't represent my district or Brian's district, frankly, without having new MTA issues every day. So the MTA is actually looking to cool down our incredibly sweltering hot subway platforms by finding technical ways to use geothermal to cool our subway stations as opposed to heat something. So I'm curious, should they be talking to you right away?
Yes, and we have been talking for some time now.
Okay.
Yeah, there's also an awful lot of waste heat generated via the infrastructure in the MTA that could be used, as we heard in the previous panel. So yes, absolutely, those opportunities exist, and certainly will offset significant infrastructure investments that would otherwise have to be made, as these systems are extremely efficient, as I mentioned, pulling 60 to 80% from the ground versus through the grid.
Excellent. Good. I would love you to help them with that, because you just have to go to certain subway stations in the months of June, July, August, and actually September, since I think yesterday was beyond hot. And any opportunities to, use that energy for something good and save us all from keeling over in our subway stations would be fantastic. So,
Senator, yeah, of course, I appreciate the question, and I would add there's a lot of maybe misunderstandings relative to the impacts of these technologies on grid infrastructure, which is often overlooked. The fact of the matter is the investor-owned utilities, they submit their rate cases with various infrastructure requirements, upgrades, et cetera. And that's baked into the rate case, and the ratepayers absorb those costs at the end of the day. What we fail to recognize is, as demand, as we heard earlier, demand is growing in New York State, and we're electrifying everything. We need to focus on solutions that are going to reduce demand, not increase it. Those costs are not in the millions, they're in the billions. And as a matter of fact, in 2022, in NYSERDA's building decarbonization study showed that implementing ground source heat pumps versus an all air source heat pump scenario would offset and save ratepayers approximately $90 billion in infrastructure costs. Those are the things that we need to focus on and keep in our line of sight.
And I know we had a discussion with the earlier panel with Allison from Building Decarbonization Coalition about, geothermal and a network system versus individual. And I'm just curious, with your association, are you finding that we keep coming up with more innovative ways to use geothermal energy?
Yes, I mean, the good news is this is an old technology. It's been around for many years, and thermal networks have been around for many years as well. And we heard a little reference to Scandinavia, where they were first movers and have done very well in this area, which we take a lot of that knowledge base and that technology, and we're applying here. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think we're moving too slow. I think the targets are aggressive, and rightfully so, but I think we've got to move through this process a little earlier. And I think there's a consistent theme that we've heard throughout on breaking down those barriers so that we can advance these clean energy technologies. And geothermal pairs perfect with solar. And geothermal is a storage mechanism, just like a battery. You can pre-charge the ground and pull from that when you have peak demand events. So it's not a one specific silver bullet technology. It is an all-end approach. And we have to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
Great. Really appreciate that, because I think that has also been my theme recently in relationship to what the feds are doing, which is trying to push us backwards every day. That I think our obligation for our state is to push harder forward to counter what they're doing. And yes, they can make it tougher for us, and they can pull some credits and some money, and they can even say they won't license our offshore wind, but we have other tools we can expand on. And I think you're exactly right. Geothermal, solar, on land wind, we should just be pushing ourselves to have higher targets and to move faster towards them. So I completely agree with you. That's my TV commercial. I'm going to double check whether Pete or Brian have any additional questions for either of you. Their hands are not going up. They're not saying it. So I want to thank you both so much for your work every day. And we have your full testimony. And this is a very valuable educational tool, I think, for all of us listening in today. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to be calling up panel number 5, starting with Lori Wheelak from Public Utility Law Project, Jessica Azoulay from the Alliance for a Green Economy, and Anshul Gupta from New Yorkers for Clean Power. Let's see that we get them all in here. Okay, I see. Jessica, Lori, and Angela's getting on. Great. Thank you for being with us today. And we have your full testimony. We're asking you to summarize in an unfairly short amount of time, but then we'll ask multiple sets of questions. So we're going to start with Lori, then go to Jessica, then go to Anshul. Hi, Lori. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lori Wheelock. I go by she, hers pronouns, and I am the Executive Director and Counsel of the Public Utility Law Project. We go by PULP for short. And first and foremost, thank you so much for including PULP in this panel. Our testimony is very long, so I'm going to keep it short, but I wanted to start this morning with a real life story of what our team sees on a daily basis. We had a customer contact us back in August who had been shut off on her electric and gas since March. And she owed money to her utility. She was behind, so she was shut off for non-payment. But because of problems with her actual meter, she had to get a plumber and an electrician and have it fixed and had to go to social services. And the amount of red tape that our team went through to help her, I can excitedly say that as of 10 minutes ago, we got good word that she should be turned on before the weekend. And so first and foremost, PULP's work every single day. I think we're known for the rate cases and the policy proceedings, but for our team who is doing the work to help low-income utility customers, it has been busier than ever. And so just elevating and look forwarding to talk to you about some of the things we're seeing and some of the barriers and problems people are facing with the federal uncertainty. To my second point, HEAP has come up a number of times this morning and into the afternoon, as did Empower Plus, and both of those programs are tremendously important to the people we serve. I would love to dive in deeper into kind of the HEAP pie. Our state is, planning to open HEAP on November 3rd, but as was discussed earlier by you, Senator Krueger and Senator May, that pie is being divided up in different ways, and we are worried about a very narrow furnace program that we're hopeful Empower Plus can actually step in and help. And that goes to my first recommendation, which is that in these times of need, we need really the state to look back and think creatively and lean on one another. If HEAP has less funding, we're going to need that Empower Plus to step in. And what about the other agencies as well? For the people on the ground that need these programs, there can be multiple applications. And so we've always been very supportive of data matching. And so this year we want to encourage the Department of Tax and Finance, who has all of our tax records, to see where they can also help the agencies move quickly to get people the benefits they need. Along with that, we notice things and patterns. I think I've talked to probably each of you about some of these topics, but sub-metering has been a significant issue and struggle for a lot of customers, not just low income. And that is a program we need to work, going from master meter to sub-metering with the hope of energy efficiency. But some of the financial issues and struggles with the sub-metering companies are really concerning, and we probably need some legislative fixes. There's also electric heat coding as we move people to electricity and heating. And so I'm excited to be here today, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And next we will go to Jessica Azulay from the Alliance for a Green Economy. Hi.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Jessica Azulay. I'm Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy, also known as AGREE. And we do many things, but I'm going to highlight two. We assist residents in Central New York in accessing energy efficiency programs, heat pumps, and solar. And we intervene in utility rate cases where we see in detail what utilities request to spend our money on and how our regulators at the Public Service Commission respond. And so with that experience, I want to tackle the topic of energy costs, which the fossil fuel industry is working hard to make the biggest obstacle to the transition through a disinformation campaign to blame the cost of energy on New York's climate mandates. So I want to set the record straight. In a typical $207 a month residential Con Ed electric bill, only 5% of the money goes toward anything related to CLCPA implementation or greenhouse gas reductions. In a typical $207 per month Con Ed gas bill, less than 1% goes to programs to address climate change. And you can read the numbers for every utility in detail in a PSC report attached to my written testimony. What truly drives up costs is not transitioning, a status quo the governor and her agencies are pushing to preserve under the euphemism of all of the above energy strategy. This means ignoring the wealth of recommendations developed over 2 years in the Climate Action Council scoping plan, which taken together would save New Yorkers $115 billion compared to the cost of inaction. Through an all of the above energy strategy, the governor is allowing utilities to ignore the CLCPA by expanding gas pipelines indefinitely, embracing micron and data centers that jack up our energy needs and costs without a plan to supply enough renewable energy, and cutting Empower Plus energy efficiency program while proposing a new $33 billion ratepayer-funded subsidy for old nuclear plants. Every dollar we put into this costly, all of the above, dirty energy plan is one we don't have to put into a clean, affordable energy transition. The legislature can and should take action to reverse this. You can legally codify the scoping plan as the CLCPA intends. You can fund Empower Plus and oppose the costly nuclear agenda. You can ensure the PSC follows the CLCPA by passing the New York Heat Act. And you can pass laws that regulate big tech projects to ensure they are required to use renewables and pay their fair share of the transition. By doing so, you ensure New York's energy transition is affordable for the residents of our state and bring a cleaner, healthier, and safer future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and that's last but not least, Ashul Gupta from New Yorkers for Clean Power.
Good afternoon. My name is Anshul Gupta. I'm the Policy and Research Director at New Yorkers for Clean Power, which is a statewide collaborative campaign to shift to a clean energy economy. First, I'd like to thank Senators Harckham, Kruger, and Parker for organizing this very timely roundtable when the executive chamber appears to be changing course on the CLCPA implementation. This is evident in the draft state energy plan that ignores the scoping plan, citing cost and other hurdles, while the Cap and Invest program, which was meant to fund the energy transition, is unlawfully paused. The interim $1 billion Sustainable Future Program, while insufficient to fill the void left by the Cap and Invest pause, should be renewed each year with at least the same level of funding until the Cap and Invest regulations go into effect. The 100-foot rule and the utility obligation to serve gas are other examples of hurdles that are preventing an affordable and organized decarbonization of our highest emitting sector, the building. Amending these antiquated laws actually saves money and is completely under state control. There is nothing the Trump administration can do about those. We have provided detailed written comments and with suggestions on moving the state towards CLCPA targets in buildings, electricity, and transportation sectors. I'll just briefly touch upon a few of those ideas now. In addition to the full New York Heat Act, we need steady funding for Empower Plus and need to have the Green Affordable Pre-Electrification Program fully funded. We need to rethink rate design for both affordability and reducing emissions. Heat pump rates and time of use rates are some of the tools that other states are using. And I'd like to emphasize that none of these rates are a subsidy. These are very rational proposals. There's a lot more we can do in the distributed energy sector. We have a list of bills in our written testimony, including permitting simplification. I'll add the SUNNY Act to that list, which was just introduced by Senator Kruger yesterday. On the topic of transmission, California just passed a landmark bill, SB 254, that authorizes and facilitates public financing and public-private partnerships for new large transmission projects to address some of the same issues that we are experiencing in New York State. We strongly urge the legislature to consider similar legislation and then apply the public financing model, or the bond financing model, for building the nearly shovel-ready Clean Path project. In the transportation sector, we should pass the Clean Deliveries Act. Also, NYCP has developed a proposal for a revenue-neutral, fuel-agnostic fee-based program to support EV adoption. This program is based on a similar proposal in the scoping plan and can help blunt the impact of the loss of federal tax subsidies. To summarize, the current federal administration's hostility does pose challenges for New York, but with ingenuity and political will, the state can still make meaningful progress towards meeting the CLCPA target. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Pete, we're going to hand it to you to start.
All right. Thank you, Liz. And thank you all. Great testimony. Interesting stuff. A lot of meat here. You know, we know a kilowatt, a lot of talk about affordability. It's what we hear about from our constituents, high utility bills. We know a kilowatt of clean energy is far cheaper than a kilowatt of natural gas, kilowatt of nuclear, and yet natural gas is still sort of synonymous in many circles with affordable energy. Nuclear is being touted as affordable, even though we know there are billions needed in subsidies to make nuclear work. And so, from the court of public opinion, we have been losing this battle. And so, what in your minds can we do as policymakers to begin to turn the tide against this, as Jessica said, the all of the above strategy, and really get people to think of um, clean energy with affordable energy and be synonymous that way?
So I would make two recommendations. One is I think we really need to focus our funding on programs that actually do tangibly lower people's energy bills. And so the Empower Plus program, which we've heard about, I think from almost every single panelist today, is one of those programs that both reduces emissions and reduces energy costs dramatically for households. Distributed solar is another that we heard about today. Putting solar on your roof or participating in a community solar project reduces your energy bill. And so these types of programs are the programs that we really need to be investing in and making sure that'll help people be able to tell the story and make it very real that clean energy reduces costs. I think the other thing, and I did put this in my written testimony, is, I don't think we need to passively stand by while this disinformation campaign happened. It's not an accident that people are kind of juxtaposing the clean energy transition and affordability, even though they're the same thing. So I really think the legislature needs to think about how it can fund an actual information campaign to combat the disinformation that the fossil fuel and nuclear industries are funding.
Okay.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
And just to, flow off of Jessica's comments, and I'll save time for Anshul too, again, this goes to the connecting of resources. I am so grateful every day that we are in New York and we have programs. Yes, some of them rely on federal funding, but some of them don't. And so Empower Plus also will now flow in, hopefully, to the Empower Plus Guarantee, which is a program specifically to help households who make that transition to that heat pump be able to afford those bills. But we also need the weatherization. We need to help them lower that usage and make sure that they're safe in their home. And that goes to the GAP fund and all, the pre-electrification work. So it's good that we have the programs in place, but now it's like protecting them and uplifting them and making sure that we can keep them going with the, massive federal changes that people are facing.
Thank you. Anshul, good to see you.
Thank you. I'll quickly add that part of this is actually controlling the narrative. PSC just issued a report that Jessica mentioned, which clearly shows that the CLCPA is not adding meaningfully to sort of our bills, and we should sort of help. We should use that report to sort of push back on the cost narrative. I would also sort of recommend that we should be careful and in our messaging and not oversimplify things. If we simply say that a kilowatt of renewable energy is cheaper, we actually risk facing pushback that if renewable energy is so cheap, why do we need incentives and why do we need federal tax credit or tax credits or other federal financial incentives, which we do because looking at the system holistically, we need transmission to put the renewable energy projects and online and to bring that renewable energy to households, which is why sort of we propose the public financing model for transmission. It is actually a very well thought out proposal and has been adopted in California. And time is up, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Rachel May has her hand up.
I do, and this is kind of a follow-up, or just to push you a little farther on these issues. Jessica, I really appreciated the way you laid it out, that about the costs. And we obviously hear the opposite all the time. People are constantly complaining about the CLCPA driving up costs. So I'm just wondering, have you tested any messages? I know, for example, that I have talked a lot when we talk about building electrification about the safety and health benefits of that. And Liz has the bill to label our gas stoves because they are a health hazard. But I feel like that completely falls on deaf ears. Like I get no traction when I talk that way. And so I'm wondering, like, are you all in a position to give us some messaging that really can ignite people's willingness to like be part of this movement more than maybe we by trial and error are able to do?
I'd be happy to provide you. There's a lot of research on the types of messaging that resonate with people. So, happy to send some of that over.
Also, eventually, we need to get the message out to the masses. The scoping plan actually recommends that NYSERDA launch a public information campaign to sort of popularize the benefits of a clean energy economy and essentially counter the disinformation which the Climate Action Council was already anticipating. So we sort of also need to fund PR campaigns and actually have them out there.
And the last thing to add is just my hope is that it will be every agency from Office of Aging, all the way to Department of Health, again, Department of Tax and Finance. I think each agency can help with that with all the materials that are going out. We knew that this was, these were targets. These are changing the energy economy in New York. And so it should be elevated through every single agency, even if they're not directly touching energy. It's a massive undertaking that every agency can help with.
Agreed. I guess for all of you, so we've talked about cap and invest several times today, and a lot of the testimony we got goes into also. So we're so far behind, and we don't know whether the governor is actually going to be moving forward on it. But we were supposed to generate between, I think, 54 and 113 billion in the first 10 years. One, do any of you think we're going to see any of this money that I feel strongly we desperately need? And two, what should we prioritize using that money for if and when we finally get our hands on some of this? Lori's going to take the first stab at it.
Yeah, and I'll be quick because I want to create space. I think one of the areas we were very interested in, and Pope loves getting into the weeds, is how the benefits would get out. We wanted to make sure that it was in a smart way, but also there was choice. So if people wanted to direct it to existing SNAP programs, EBT cards, vouchers for transportation, credits on utility bills, having some sort of suite and having, again, the agencies united in that. For us, again, I think we're very worried for the low-income individuals we're seeing contact us every day who already have less Medicaid, coming their way. They're losing SNAP, and we still don't know what's happening with HEAP. So I think, again, anywhere we can monitor where our most vulnerable populations are between disadvantaged communities to the utilities helping to code through their billing systems, I think that will, again, help make this process work, between cap and invest and getting the benefits where they need.
I guess even though I'm asking you the question, I'll add in, since obviously for anyone in elected office, the lack of affordability and the growing rates and utilities are an explosive political issue, literally for many of us, making sure that some of that money clearly goes to people who are struggling to be able to pay their utility bills. And certainly Hope talked about a number of things they work on, but the numbers of people who owe on their utility bills is so shocking to me. and it keeps growing. It's like nobody's actually seemingly able to pay their utility bills. So, you know, yes, we want to put it into all these things, and we certainly want to invest in speeding up the transition to green energy, which, as Achal just said, does have real costs to get them up and running, even though then you start to save money on your per hour kilowatt cost, you know, dramatically. But I just feel like just to make sure we continue to do all the things we need to do, that we're gonna have to make sure people are seeing a real solution for themselves if we're building in cap and invest, excuse me. But I didn't mean to cut off Jessica or Ashel if they wanted to take another stab at this.
I'll let Anshul go first. Go ahead, Anshul.
I think first we should work towards getting the Cap and Invest program actually implemented, and then we can talk about spending the money. But I'll give one quick example. As a big sort of transmission project comes online, it takes several years for it to become to get its utilization up to 100%. But our straight line depreciation model starts making the current ratepayers pay the full cost of the transmission right from the beginning, which is why if we have a public financing bond financed sort of model for funding transmission projects, and again, this can also be funded from the money from capital investment when it starts flowing in, then the actual end users can realize the benefits of the cheap kilowatt hours from renewables. But if we are adding these substantial costs of transmission onto ratepayers in an unequitable way, so essentially the current ratepayers end up subsidizing future ratepayers who will see the full benefits of those transmission projects, then the ratepayers are not seeing the benefits of that cheap renewable energy.
I think the only thing I would add here is that I think we're in a critical moment when we passed this incredible groundbreaking bill, the CLCPA. We went through this multi-stakeholder 2-year-long process to develop a set of recommendations with panels of experts from all over the state and multiple public hearings. And now we're at a moment to implement that plan. And instead of doing that, we're doing an energy plan that kind of contradicts that Climate Action Council scoping plan. And I think this is a moment when the legislature really needs to take the reins again. You all passed the CLCPA. You have the power to legislate to make sure that we now move forward with the recommendations, including programs like Cap and Invest. So I think as we go into next year, I hope that you will all think about, how can you take that responsibility in this moment and pass laws and pass mandates to make sure the executive actually carries forth that plan.
Thank you. All right, Pete, should I let you be the closing, I don't know, close the show?
Well, really just to say thank you, but to piggyback on what Jessica just said, we did pass Cap and Invest. That's a law of the state. And we see where that is. So we continue. That's a conflict between legislatures and executives. So I want to thank everybody. Certainly thank Senator Mays, Senator Kavanaugh, Senator Gennardis. Thank you, Senator Krueger, for steering the ship through this. All of our panelists, both from this panel, our previous panel, all of the staff from all of our offices who did so much work on this. And just a reminder to everybody, this is only part one of a two-part series of roundtables. This is being recorded. This will be shared with state agencies so that they will hear the specific comments that all of our advocates and NGOs have made today so that they can respond in a detailed fashion in a subsequent roundtable, as well as some regional participants as well to get some regional representation. So that's really all I have to say other than to thank everybody. This was a wonderfully informative and great discussion. So thank you all for being with us. And with that, turn it back to Senator Krueger. And thank you again, Liz, for your partnership.
Well, and thank you. And again, everyone, sometimes you can wake up in the morning with what's happening at the federal level and just think, oh my God, I can't deal with any more of this. But in fact, I think for those of us who are in the climate fight together, we know we don't have a choice. We have to move forward, right? The earth is continuing to heat up and we're seeing it every moment of every day. So our job, I think, as legislators and as advocates and the state agencies who will be bringing in a week have to be more innovative and creative than ever to help us basically move forward despite some of the added challenges. So this is the state of New York. We know how to do big things and we need to do more. And that, I think, will be a major assignment for the legislature in the next year. So I would so appreciate all your partnerships in this. So go have a lovely weekend, and some of you will see at the next roundtable very soon. Take care. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.